Chapter 1. The salty smell still remains on the deck. You return to the ocean around midnight. The wind from the harbor is colder than usual, carrying a salty smell and something else, the smell of old gunpowder, but not quite gone. The wharf guard looked at you from his cabin above, but said nothing. The lights on the deck were dim, like the eyes of a dead fish. You step on them. The rubber soles make no sound. The train is quiet, too quiet. Not out of respect for the dead, but because someone is still listening to see what has been discovered and what hasn't. You bend down on the wooden floor. The blood had been wiped away. Not very well. There were still some small, dark, red cracks between the floorboards, not shoe prints, drag marks, as if the body had been turned over after death. You let out a breath and grab your notebook. Note, the body was found lying face down, but the long blood trail suggests it had been turned. Who? Why? You enter the captain's cabin. There was still the smell of cigarette smoke. It didn't come from Falut. He smoked a pipe, not a cigarette. You open the desk drawer. A pack of Gauloises Bleu, the kind smoked by Parisians, not sailors. Note, someone from a ship outside Falut has been here. Someone from the mainland, or someone who wanted to leave a scent. You look through the cabin window, which is just a crack open, just wide enough for a small person to squeeze through. And Marie, if that was her, was that type, but something doesn't fit. You go back down to the engine compartment, where the fan blades sputtered, and the smell of diesel mixed with the smell of rust. You see him there, Joel, the sub-engineer. He's not named in any of the reports. He's not on the investigation list, but you remember the look in his eyes that first day evasive, passing like dirty water stains on a railing. You asked, "Where were you when the murder happened?" He paused. "Here. I work the night shift. Can anyone prove it?" "No, I'm alone." You step closer. The heat from the engine mixes with the sweat on the back of his neck. "Do you hear gunshots?" "Unclear. The ship is running." And before that, he did not answer immediately. You said softly, like a knife punch in the space between answers, "I went up on deck. I heard arguing." He turned around, eyes bulging, sweat dripping. "It's not me. You don't need to listen to the whole thing." Notes, the only one besides Falutis, Besson, and Marie who can enter and exit every compartment without being noticed. The only one who can rotate bodies. The only one without an alibi. You leave the engine room. This time, you don't go straight to the station. You go to Grand Banks Café. The bar was still open, but there was no laughter, no songs, only the yellow glow of wine. You sit down, order a Calvados. Marie was behind the counter, not washing glasses, not wiping tables, just sitting, staring blankly. You pick up the glass and said, just loud enough for her to hear, "You didn't kill him, but you know who did." She did not turn back. Just say, "And if I don't tell, who will you arrest?" You answer, "The only person who knows how to kill without leaving a trace is the one whose name is not on the record." Chapter 2. Light from the harbor light. 04:13 a.m. You stand at the foot of the lighthouse on the east side of the harbor. It is not yet fully light. The wind carries the smell of damp moss, rust from the railings, and the saltiness of things left unsaid. You knock 3 times on the rusty metal door. A moment later, the door opened. The dim light from inside reflected the shadowed eyes of lighthouse keeper Georges Simenon, the only person awake at the hour when the rest of the town dreamed of a peaceful sea. He frowned when he saw you. "What's wrong? You don't beat around the bush." The night Falut died. Did you see anything unusual on the ocean? The lighthouse keeper frowned and leaned out of the doorway. You saw him glance over the train, as if checking to see if the shadow of the past was still there. The boat comes in at 3:30, he said. The whole town knows. Before that, he was pensive. I saw a man leave the ship. Didn't look like a sailor. No bag. Just an old brown coat. Walked quickly. Didn't say goodbye. You squint? What time? It was almost 3 o'clock. I had just changed the main lens. The light had just turned the first circle when he appeared. You take out your notebook. See face. No, but he went toward the Grand Banks. Hey, Saicho Amisi, siadikampokam. You close the book. No thanks. Georges doesn't expect it either. You turn around. In your head, you see the route clearly. The stranger boarded the train before 2:30, committing the crime probably not with a gun. Maybe faking the scene to raise suspicion on Marie. Left the ship before 3:00. No one in sight. Ana Sekio. The ship docked at 3:30. Falut was found at 4:10. There was a gap of exactly 40 minutes, and this guy used it very effectively. You return to the Grand Banks. She strikes. This time, Marie is no longer behind the counter. An old waitress has taken her place. You don't ask. You know she's gone or been told to go. You order a cup of coffee. Not because you want to stay awake, but because you need to sit still long enough for people to think you've given up. And then he appeared, Joel, not wearing ship uniform, wearing brown coat. Same as lighthouse keeper description. He didn't sit. He didn't order. He just looked around, his eyes lost like someone who's just seen waves higher than the deck. You stand up and walk back. You return to the mainland without telling me. He started. His eyes reflected the dim yellow light. I just went for a walk. You nod. From the engine room to the captain's quarters. Then to the tavern. Then to the station first thing tomorrow, eh? Joel did not answer. But his hand, the engine hand, was shaking slightly. You continue. What did you do before going to the beach? Silent. You pull out a small piece of paper, a transcript of his confession. The handwriting is clean and neat, not the handwriting of an uneducated person. You asked, Bachelor of Engineering, or fired engineer, Joel sneered. A growl, former university lecturer, mechanical engineering. You nod, as if everything just clicks together. The guns in the Falut room were fitted with makeshift silencers. Steel tubes covered in tarpaulin, the kind only engineers know how to make. You looked deep into his eyes. Marie didn't kill Falut, but you did. Joel jumped up. But you saw that movement 3 seconds ago. You signal. 2 policemen waiting outside the door enter. One locks his arms. One presses his shoulders. Joel screams, not out of grievance, but because it's all over so quickly. You stood there, watching him get dragged away. The yellow light overhead was still flickering. The smell of cold coffee had spread across the table. You go back to the bar, sit down. Someone gives you a folded piece of paper. The sender's name is not mentioned. You open it. Female handwriting, even, not shaky. I knew, but I didn't have the courage to say it. You did it for me. Thanks, M. Chapter 3. The Delfzijl police station was not large. One room was reserved for interrogation. The walls were paneled, and the ceiling light swayed as if tilted by the waves. You stand opposite him. Joel had washed his face. His hands were cuffed to the edge of the table. He still hadn't said anything, but his eyes were no longer averted. Like someone caught red-handed with nothing left to hide, only a truth gnawing at his bones. You put a glass of water in front of him. "Speak!" Joel pursed his lips. Then he began, not for love, not for Marie either. "You crossed your arms," he continued, "2 years ago. Fallout met me in Dunkirk. He said bluntly, 'I know what you did in Rouen. You need money. I need someone who knows how to deliver something that no one asks for. Opium.'" Joel shook his head. "No. Electronic data, encrypted disks, defense waterway plans, stolen. Fallout was the middleman. I built a secret compartment in the ocean, right under the engine cooling system. No one knows." You frown. And Bassan, he didn't know anything. He was just a backup, a jealous, manipulative jerk. Marie was just bait at first, but she wasn't stupid. She found out. No. She guessed. She asked me, in the middle of the night, why I kept sneaking down to the engine room in the middle of a trip. I knew that look, the look of someone who had been betrayed and knew exactly what she was about to do again. You tap your fingers on the table. "She threatened you." Joel smiled faintly. "No." She laughed. She said, "If you're smart, do this for yourself, not for him." You looked into his eyes. "Kill Fallout?" Joel nodded. "I went up on deck at 2:15. The captain's door was loosely locked. He was asleep. I used a short Mauser, the kind you know, easy to disassemble, and can be hidden in the engineering box. I didn't look him in the eye when I pulled the trigger." You sit down and say softly, "So why stage the crime to blame Marie?" Joel clasped his hands. "Because she betrayed me, not Fallout. Both. They planned together to set me up, make me the carrier, then call the police as soon as we reach the port." You sigh. Everything fits together like a fishing net under the moon. The meshes no longer tangled. You leave the interrogation room. Marie stood in the hallway, her long sleeves covering most of her fingers. "Has he spoken?" she asked. You nod. "Do you know?" She looked at you for a long time, as if you were the only one left in the middle of a sinking ship. "Not sure, but I guess." "I said." "And you let him." Marie smiled, not happily, not sadly. A smile that said the world was finally working properly, even if it cost her blood. "I don't hold anyone back. I don't stop anyone." You step outside. It's almost dawn. Mist is thick on the water. The lighthouse flickers. Below, the ocean remained anchored in port, like a witness who never told the truth, but always knew who the killer was. Chapter 4. "Speaking for myself," said the chief inspector of Fécamp's police department as he sharpened a blue pencil. "I'll admit I have few illusions left. It's so rarely that we manage to clear up any of these cases involving sailors. And that's being optimistic. Just you try getting to the bottom of one of those mindless brawls that happen every day of the week down by the harbor. When my men get there, they're all beating 7 bells out of each other. Then they spot uniforms, and they close ranks and go on the offensive. Question them, and they all lie, contradict each other, and muddy the waters to the point that in the end, we give up. There were 4 of them smoking in the office, which was already filled with tobacco fumes. It was evening. The divisional head of Le Havre's flying squad, who was officially in charge of the investigation, had a young inspector with him. Maigret was there in a private capacity. He sat at a table in a corner. He hadn't yet spoken. "It looks straightforward enough to me," ventured the young inspector, who was hoping to earn the approval of his chief. Theft wasn't the motive for the crime, so it was an act of revenge. On which member of the crew did Captain Fallout come down hardest when they were away at sea? But the chief inspector from Le Havre gave a shrug, and the junior inspector turned red and fell silent. Still, no, it's something else. And top of the list is this woman you unearthed for us, Maigret. Did you give the boys in uniform all the information they need to find her? Damn it, I can't for the life of me work out what part she played in all this. The boat was at sea for 3 months. She wasn't there when it docked, because no one has reported seeing her get off it. The wireless operator is engaged to be married. By all accounts, Captain Fallout didn't seem the kind of man who'd do anything silly. And yet he wrote his will just before he got himself murdered. It would also be interesting to know who exactly went to the trouble of delivering the will here, sighed Maigret. There's also a reporter. He's the one who wears a beige raincoat, who claims in L'Éclair de Rouen that the owners of the Océan had sent it to sea to do something other than fish for cod. They always say that, every time, muttered the Fécamp chief inspector. The conversation languished. There was a long silence during which the spittle in Maigret's pipe could be heard sizzling. He got stiffly to his feet. "If anyone asked me what the distinctive feature of this case is," he said, "I'd say that it has the mark of rage on it. Everything to do with the trawler is acrimonious, tense, overheated. The crew get drunk and fight in the Grand Banks Café. I bring the wireless operator's fiancée to see him, and he could barely conceal his irritation and gave her a pretty cool reception. He almost as good as told her to mind her own business. At Wyport, the chief mechanic calls his wife all sorts and treats me like some dog he can kick. And then I come across 2 people who seem to have the same mark on them, the girl called Adele, and her boyfriend. They make scenes on the beach, and no sooner do they settle their differences than they disappear together." "And what do you make of it all?" asked the chief inspector from Le Havre. "Me? I don't make anything of it. I merely remark that I feel as if I'm going round in circles, surrounded by a lot of mad people. Anyway, I'll say good night. I'm just an observer here. Besides, my wife is expecting me back at the hotel. You'll let me know. Chief Inspector, if you locate the Wyport woman and the man in the gray car, of course, good night." Instead of walking through the town, Maigret went via the harbor, hands in pocket, pipe between his teeth. The empty port was a large black rectangle where the only lights that showed were those of the Océan, which was still being unloaded. "The mark of rage," he muttered to himself. No one paid attention when he climbed on board. He walked along the deck with no obvious purpose. He saw a light in a foredeck hatchway. He leaned over it. Warm air blew up into his face. A combined smell of doss house, canteen, and fish market. He went down the iron ladder and found himself face to face with 3 men who were eating from mess tins balanced on their knees. For light, there was an oil lamp hung on gimbals. In the middle of their quarters was a cast iron stove caked with grease. Along the walls were 4 tiers of bunks, some still full of straw, the others empty, and boots and sou'westers hanging on pegs. Of the 3, only Louis had stood up. The other 2 were the Breton and a black sailor with bare feet. "Enjoying your dinner," growled Maigret. He was answered with grunts. "Where are your mates? Gone home? Haven't they?" said Lewis. "You gotta have nowhere to go and be broke to hang about here when you're not at sea." Maigret had to get used to the semi-darkness and especially the smell. He tried to imagine the same space when it was filled by 40 men who could not move a muscle without bumping into somebody. 40 men dropping onto their bunks without taking their boots off, snoring, chewing tobacco, smoking. Did the captain ever come down here? Never. And all the while the throb of the screw, the smell of coal smoke, of soot, of burning hot metal, the pounding of the sea. "Come with me, Louis," out of the corner of his eye. Maigret caught the sailor, full of bravado, making signs to the others behind his back, but once aloft, on the deck now flooded with shadow, his swagger evaporated. "What's up?" "Nothing." "Listen. Suppose the captain died at sea, on the way home. Was there someone who could have got the boat safely back to port? Maybe not, because the first mate doesn't know how to take a bearing. Still, they say that, using the wireless operator could always find the ship's position. Did you see much of the wireless operator? Never saw him at all. Don't imagine we walk around like we're doing now. There are general quarters for some. Others have separate quarters of their own. You can go for days without budging from your small corner. How about the chief mechanic? Him. Yeah, I saw him more or less every day. How did he seem?" Lewis turned evasive. "How the devil should I know? Look, what are you driving at? I'd like to see how you make out when everything's going wrong. A lad goes overboard. A steam valve blows. The captain's mind is set on anchoring the trawler in a station where there's no fish. A man gets gangrene, and the rest of it. You'd be effing and blinding 19 to the dozen. And for the smallest thing, you'd take a swing at someone, and to cap it all, when you're told the captain on the bridge is off his rocker. Was he? I never asked him. Anyway what? At the end of the day, what difference will it make? There'll always be someone who'll tell you. Look, it seems there were 3 of them up top who never went anywhere without their revolvers. 3 of them spying on each other, all afraid of each other. The captain hardly ever came out of his cabin, where he'd ordered the charts, compass, sextant, and the rest to be brought. And it went on like that for 3 months. Yes. Anything else you want to ask me? No. That's it. You can go." Lewis walked away, almost regretfully. He stopped for a moment by the hatch, watching the inspector, who was puffing gently at his pipe. Cod was still being extracted from the gaping hold in the glare of the acetylene lamps. But Maigret had had enough of trucks, dockers, the quays, the jetties, and the lighthouse. He was standing on a world of plated steel, and, half closing his eyes, he imagined being out on the open sea, in a field of surging swells through which the bows plowed an endless furrow, hour after hour, day after day, week after week. Don't imagine we walk around like we're doing now. Men below, serving the engines. Men in the forward crew quarters, and on the afterdeck, a handful of God's creatures, the captain, his first mate, the chief mechanic, and the wireless operator. A small binnacle light to see the compass by. Charts spread out, 3 months. When they'd got back, Captain Falloux had written his will, in which he stated his intention to put an end to his life. An hour after they'd berthed, he'd been strangled and dumped in the harbor, and Madame Bernard, His landlady was left grieving because now there would be no marriage of two ideally suited people. The chief mechanic shouted at his wife. The girl called Adele defied an unknown man, but ran off with him the moment Maigret held a picture of herself, scribbled on in red ink, under her nose. And in his prison cell, the wireless operator, Leclanche, in a foul temper. The boat hardly moved. Just a gentle motion, like a chest breathing. One of the three men he'd seen in the foredeck was playing the accordion. As he turned his head, Maigret made out the shapes of two women on the quayside. Suddenly galvanized, he hurried down the gangway. "What are you doing here?" He felt his face burn because he had sounded gruff, but especially because he was aware that he too was being infected by the frenzy which filled all those involved in the case. "We wanted to see the boat," said Madame Maigret with disarming self-effacement. "It's my fault," said Marie Leonec. "I was the one who insisted on—" "All right, that's fine. Have you eaten?" "It's 10 o'clock. Have you?" "Yes, thanks." The windows of the Grand Banks Café were more or less the only ones still lit. A few shadowy figures could be made out on the jetty, tourists dutifully out for their evening stroll. "Have you found out anything?" asked Leclanche's fiancée. "Not yet. Or rather, not much." "I don't dare ask you a favor." "You can always ask." "I'd like to see Pierre's cabin." "Could I?" He shrugged and took her there. Madame Maigret refused to walk over the gangway. Literally a metal box. Wireless equipment. A steel table. A seat and a bunk. Hanging on a wall, a picture of Marie Leonec in Breton costume. Old shoes on the floor and a pair of trousers on the bed. The girl inhaled the atmosphere with a mixture of curiosity and delight. "Yes, but it isn't at all how I'd imagined. His shoes have never been cleaned. Oh, look. He kept drinking from the same glass without ever washing it." A strange girl, an amalgam of shyness, delicacy, and a good upbringing on the one hand, and dynamism and fearlessness on the other. She hesitated. "And the captain's cabin," Maigret smiled faintly, for he realized that deep down she was hoping to make a discovery. He led the way. He even fetched a lantern he found on deck. "How can they live with this smell?" She sighed. She looked carefully around her. He saw her become flustered and shy as she said, "Why has the bed been raised up?" Maigret stopped drawing on his pipe. She was right. All the crew slept in berths which were more or less part of the architectural structure of the boat. Only the captain had a metal bed. Under each of its legs, a wooden block had been placed. "You don't think that's strange? It's as if—" "Go on." All trace of ill humor had gone. Maigret saw the girl's pale face lighten as her mind worked and her elation grew. "It's as if, but you'll only laugh at me, as if the bed's been propped up so that someone could hide underneath. Without those pieces of wood, the bedstead would be much too low. But the way it is now—" And before he could stop her, she lay down flat on the floor, regardless of the dirt on the floor, and slid under the bed. "There's enough room," she said. "Right. You can come out now." "Just a minute. If you don't mind. Pass me that lamp for a minute, Inspector." She went quiet. He couldn't work out what she was doing. He lost patience. "Well?" She reappeared suddenly, her gray suit covered with dust and eyes shining. "Pull the bed out. You'll see." Her voice broke. Her hands shook. Maigret yanked the bed away from the wall and looked at the floor. "I can't see anything." When she didn't answer, he turned and saw that she was crying. What did you see? Why are you crying? There, read it. He had to bend down and place the lamp against the wall. Then he could make out words scratched on the wood with a sharp object, a pin or a nail. Gaston, Octave, Pierre, Hen. The last word was unfinished, and yet it did not look as if it had been done in a hurry. Some of the letters must have taken an hour to inscribe. There were flourishes, little strokes, the sort of doodling that's done in an idle moment. A comic note was struck by two stags' antlers above the name Octave. The girl was sitting on the edge of the bed, which had been pulled into the middle of the cabin. She was still crying, in silence. Very curious, muttered Maigret. I'd like to know if... At this point, she stood up and said excitedly, Of course, that's it. There was a woman here. She was hiding. All the same, men would come looking for her. Wasn't Captain Fallout called Octave? The inspector had rarely been so taken off guard. Don't go jumping to conclusions, he said, though there was no conviction in his words. But it's all written down. And the whole story is there for men who... What could he say to calm her down? Look, I've a lot of experience. So take it from me. In police matters, you must always wait before making judgments. Only yesterday, you were telling me that Leclanche is incapable of killing. Yes, she sobbed. Yes, and I still believe it, isn't it? She still clung desperately to her hopes. His name is Pierre. I know. So what one sailor in 10 is called Pierre, and there were 50 men on board. There's also a Gaston and a Henry. So what do you think? Nothing. Are you going to tell the examining magistrate about this? And to think it was me who... Calm down. We haven't found out anything, except that the bed was raised for one reason or another, and that someone has written names on a wall. There was a woman there. Why a woman? But, come on, Madame Maigret is waiting for us on the quay. You're right. She wiped her tears, meek now, and sniffled. I shouldn't have come, but I thought, but it's not possible that Pierre... Listen, I must see him as soon as I can. I'll talk to him, alone. You can arrange it, can't you? Before starting down the gangway, she looked back with eyes full of hate at the dark ship, which was no longer the same to her now that she knew that a woman had been hiding on board. Madame Maigret watched her, intrigued. Come, you mustn't cry. You know everything will all turn out all right. No, it won't, she said with a despairing shake of her head. She couldn't speak. She could hardly breathe. She tried to look at the boat one more time. Madame Maigret, who did not understand what was going on, looked inquiringly at her husband. Take her back to the hotel. Try and calm her down. Did something happen? Nothing specific. I expect I'll be back quite late. He watched them walk away. Marie Léonec turned round a dozen times, and Madame Maigret had to drag her away like a child. Maigret thought about going back on board, but he was thirsty. There were still lights on in the Grand Banks Café. 4 sailors were playing cards at a table. Near the counter, a young cadet had his arm round the waist of the serving girl, who giggled from time to time. The landlord was watching the card game and was offering suggestions. He greeted Maigret with, "Hello, you back again?" He did not look overjoyed to see him. The very opposite. He seemed rather put out. Look sharp. Julie, serve the inspector. Whatever's your poison, it's on me. Thanks, but if it's all the same to you, I'll order like any other customer. I didn't want to get on the wrong side of you. Was the day going to end with the mark of rage still on it? One of the sailors muttered something in his Norman dialect, which Maigret translated roughly as, "Watch out, I smell more trouble." The inspector looked him in the eye. The man reddened and stammered, "Clubs, trumps. You should have played a spade," declared Lewis for something to say. Chapter 5. The phone rang. Léon snatched the receiver, then called Maigret. It was for him. "Hello," said a bored voice on the other end of the line. "Detective Chief Inspector Maigret. It's the duty desk officer at Fécamp Police Station. I've just phoned your hotel. I was told you might be at the Grand Banks Café. I'm sorry to disturb you, sir. I've been glued to the phone for half an hour. I can't get hold of the chief anywhere. As for the head of the flying squad, I'm wondering if he's still actually here in Fécamp. Thing is, I've got a couple of odd customers who've just turned up saying they want to make statements. All very urgent. Apparently, a man and a woman. Did they come in a gray car? Yes, sir. Are they the pair you're looking for?" 10 minutes later, Maigret was at the police station. All the offices were closed except for the inquiries area, a room divided in two by a counter. Behind it, the duty officer was writing. He smoked as he wrote. A man was waiting. He was sitting on a bench, elbows on knees, chin in his hands, and a woman was walking up and down, beating a tattoo on the floorboards with her high heels. The moment the inspector appeared, she walked right up to him, and the man got to his feet with a sigh of relief and growled between gritted teeth, "And not a minute too soon?" It was indeed the couple from my port, both a little crosser than during the domestic shouting match Maigret had sat through. "Come next door with me." Maigret showed them into the office of the chief inspector, sat down in his chair, and filled a pipe while he took a good look at the pair. "Take a seat." "No, thanks," said the woman, who was clearly the more highly strung of the two. "What I've got to say won't take long." He now had a frontal view of her, lit by a strong electric light. He did not need to look too hard to situate her type. Her picture with the head removed had been enough. A good-looking girl, in the popular sense of the expression. A girl with alluring curves, good teeth, an inviting smile, and a permanent come-hither look in her eye. More accurately, a real bitch. A tease, on the make, always ready to create a scandal or burst into gales of loud, vulgar laughter. Her blouse was pink silk. To it was pinned a large gold brooch as big as a 100-sou coin. "First off, I want to say—" "Excuse me," interrupted Maigret. "Please sit down as I've already asked. You will answer my questions?" She scowled. Her mouth turned ugly. "Look here. You're forgetting I'm here because I'm prepared to—" Her companion scowled, irritated by her behavior. They were made for each other. He was every inch the kind who is always seen with girls like her. His appearance was not exactly sinister. He was respectably dressed, though in bad taste. He wore large rings on his fingers and a pearl pin in his tie. Even so, the effect was disturbing. Perhaps because he gave off a sense of existing outside the established social norms. He was the type to be found at all times of day in bars and brasseries, drinking cheap champagne with working girls and living in third-class hotels. You first, name, address, occupation. He started to get to his feet. Sit down. I just want to say, just say nothing. Name, Gaston Bouzier. At present, I'm in the business of selling and renting out houses. I'm based mainly in Le Havre, in the Silver Ring Hotel. Are you a registered property agent? No. But do you work for an agency? Not exactly. That's enough. In a word, you dabble. What did you do before? I was a commercial traveler for a make of bicycle. I also sold sewing machines out in the sticks. Convictions. Don't tell him. Gaston. The woman broke in. You've got a nerve. It was us who came here to be quiet. 2 convictions. 1 suspended for passing a dud check. For the other, I got 2 months for not handing over to the owner an installment I'd received on a house. Small-time stuff, as you see. Even so, he gave the impression that he was used to having to deal with policemen. He stayed relaxed, with something in his eye that suggested he could turn nasty. You next, said Maigret, turning to the woman. Adèle Noirhomme, born in Belleville, on the Vice Squad register. I was put on it 5 years ago in Strasbourg because some rich cow had it in for me on account of me having snatched her husband off her. But ever since, you've never been bothered by the police. Fine. Now tell me in what capacity you signed on for a cruise on the ocean. First, we'd better explain, the man replied, because if we're here, it means we've got nothing to be ashamed of. At Wyport. Adèle told me you had a picture of her. She was sure you were going to arrest her. Our first thought was to hop it so we wouldn't get into trouble. Because we both know the score. When we got to Etretat, I saw policemen stopping cars up ahead, and I knew they'd go on looking for us, so I decided to come in voluntarily. Now you, lady, I asked what you were doing on board the trawler. Dead simple. I was following my boyfriend, Captain Fallout. Yes, the captain. I'd been with him, so to say, since last November. We met in Le Havre, in a bar. He fell for me. He used to come back to see me 2 or 3 times a week, though from the start I thought he was a bit odd, because he never asked me to do anything. It's true. He was ever so prissy. Everything had to be just so. He set me up in a room in a nice little hotel, and I started thinking that if I played my cards right, he'd end up marrying me. Sailors don't get rich, but it's steady money, and there's a pension. Did you ever come to Fécamp with him? No, he wouldn't have that. It was him who came to me. He was jealous. He was a decent enough sort who can't have been around much because he was 50 and was as shy with women as a schoolboy. That plus the fact that he'd got me under his skin. Just a moment. Were you already the mistress of Gaston Bouzier? Sure, but I'd introduced Gaston de Fallout. Said he was my brother. I see. So in short, you were both being subsidized by the captain. I was working, protested Bouzier. I can see you now. Hard at it every Saturday afternoon. And which of you came up with the scheme for sending you to sea on the boat? Fallout. He couldn't bear the thought of leaving me by myself while he was away playing sailors. But he was also scared witless because the rules about that sort of thing are strict, and he was a stickler for rules. He held out until the very last minute. Then he came and fetched me. The night before, he was to set sail. He took me to his cabin. I quite fancied the idea because it made a change, But if I'd known what it was going to be like, I'd have been off like a shot. Bouzier didn't try to stop you. He couldn't make up his mind. Do you understand? We couldn't go against what the old fool wanted. He'd promised me he'd retire as soon as he got back after that trip and marry me. But the whole setup was nothing to write home about. It was no fun being cooped up all day in a cabin that stank of fish. And on top of that, every time anybody came in, I had to hide under the bed. We'd been at sea no time when Follot started regretting he'd taken me along. I never saw a man have the jitters like him. 12 times a day, he'd check to see if he'd locked the door. If I spoke, he shut me up in case anyone overheard. He was grumpy, on pins. Sometimes he'd stare at me for minutes on end as if he was tempted to get rid of me by throwing me overboard. Her voice was shrill, and she was waving her arms about. Not to mention the fact that he got more and more jealous. He asked me about my past. He tried to find out. Then he'd go 3 days without talking to me, spying on me like I was his enemy. Then all of a sudden, he'd be madly in love with me again. There were times when I was really scared of him. Which members of the crew saw you when you were on board? It was the 4th night. I felt like a breath of air out on deck. I'd had enough of being locked up. Follot went outside and checked to make sure there was no one about. It was as much as he could do to let me walk 5 steps up and down. He must have gone up on the bridge for a moment, and it was then that the wireless operator showed up and spoke to me. He was shy, but got worked up. Next day, he managed to get into my cabin. Did Follot see him? I don't think so. He didn't mention anything. Did you sleep with Leclanche? She did not answer. Gaston Bouzier sneered. Admit it. He barked in a voice full of spite. I'm free to do as I please, especially seeing as how you didn't exactly abstain from female company while I was away. Don't deny it. Are you forgetting the girl from the Villa des Fleurs? And what about that photo I found in your pocket? Maigret sat as solemn and impassive as the oracle. I asked if you slept with the wireless operator, and I'm telling you to go to blazes. She smiled provocatively. Her lips were moist. She knew men desired her. She was counting on the promise of her pouting mouth, her sensuous body. The chief mechanic saw you too. What's he been telling you? Nothing. I'll recap. The captain kept you hidden in his cabin. Pierre Leclanche and the chief mechanic would come to you there, on the quiet. Was Follot aware of this? No. Although he had his suspicions and prowled round you and never left you alone except when he absolutely had to. How do you know? Did he still talk about marrying you? I don't know. In his mind's eye, Maigret saw the trawler, the firemen down in the bunkers, the crew crammed into the foredeck, the wireless room, the captain's cabin aft, with the raised bed. And the voyage had lasted 3 months. All that time, 3 men had prowled round the cabin where this woman was shut away. I've done some pretty stupid things, but that, she exclaimed, hand on heart, if I had to do it again. A girl should always be on her guard against shy men who talk about marriage. If you'd listened to me, said Gaston Bouzier, you shut your trap if I'd listened to you. I know what kind of accommodation I'd be in now. I don't want to speak ill of Follot, because he's dead. But all the same, he was cracked. He had peculiar ideas. He'd have thought he'd done something wrong just because he'd broken some rules, and it went from bad to worse. After a week, he never opened his mouth except to go on at me or ask if anybody had been in the cabin. Leclinch was the one he was most jealous of. He'd say, "You'd like that, wouldn't you, a younger man? Say it. Admit that if he came in when I wasn't here, you wouldn't turn him away." And he'd laugh so nastily that it hurt. "How many times did Leclinch come to see you?" Maigret asked slowly. "All right. The hell with it. Once, on the fourth day, I couldn't even tell you how it happened. After that, it wasn't on the cards, because Fallet kept such a close eye on me. And the mechanic, never but he tried. He'd come and look at me through the porthole. When he did that, he looked as white as a sheet. What sort of life do you think that was? I was like an animal in a cage. When the sea was rough, I was sick, and Fallout didn't even try to look after me. He went for weeks without touching me. Then the urge would come back. He'd kiss me as if he wanted to bite me, and held me so tight I thought he was trying to suffocate me." Gaston Bouzier had lit a cigarette and was now smoking it with a sarcastic expression on his face. "Please note, Inspector, all this had nothing to do with me. While it was going on, I was working." "Oh, give it a rest, will you?" she said, losing patience. "What happened when you got back? Did Fallout tell you that he was intending to kill himself?" "What? Him? He didn't say anything. When we got back to port, he hadn't said a single word to me for 2 weeks. To tell the truth, I don't think he spoke to anyone. He'd stay put for hours, with his eyes just staring in front of him. Meantime, I'd made up my mind to leave him. I was fed up with it all, wasn't I? I'd have sooner starved to death. I'd never give up my freedom. I heard somebody walking along the quayside. Then he came in the cabin and said just a few words. 'Wait here until I come to fetch you.' Spoken like a captain. Didn't he ever speak more? Fondly. At the finish, no. Go on. I don't know anything else. Or rather, the rest I learned from Gaston. He was there, down at the harbor." "Talk," Maigret ordered the man. "Like she said, I was down by the harbor. I saw the crew go into the bar. I waited for Adele. It was dark. Then after a while, the captain came on shore by himself. There were trucks parked nearby. He started walking, and as he did, a man jumped him. I don't know exactly what happened, but there was a noise, like a body falling into the water. Would you recognize the man? No. It was dark, and the truck stopped me seeing much. Which way did he go when he left?" "I think he walked along the quay." "And you didn't see the wireless operator?" "I don't know. I've no idea what he looks like." "And you," said Maigret, turning to the woman, "how did you get off the boat?" "Somebody unlocked the door of the cabin where I was shut in. It was Leclinch. He said, 'Go quickly.' Was that all?" I tried to ask him what was happening. I heard people running along the quayside and a boat with a lantern being rowed across the harbor. "Get going," he repeated. He pushed me on to the gangway. Everybody was looking the other way. No one paid any attention to me. I had the feeling that something horrible was going on, but I preferred to make myself scarce. Gaston was waiting for me a little further along. "And what did the two of you do after that?" Gaston was as white as a sheet. "We went into bars and drank rum. We spent the night at the railway inn. The next day, all the papers were full of the death of Fallout. So first we took ourselves off to Le Havre, just in case. We didn't want to get mixed up in that business. But that didn't stop her wanting to come back and nose around here," snapped Gaston. I don't know whether it was on account of the wireless operator or... Just shut up. That's enough. Of course, I was curious about what had happened, so we came back here to Faycom 3 times so that we wouldn't attract attention. We stayed at Yport, and you never saw the chief mechanic again. How do you know about that? One day, in Yport, I was scared by the way he looked at me. He followed me quite a long way. Why were you arguing earlier this afternoon with Gaston? She gave a shrug. Because, look, haven't you got it yet? He thinks I'm in love with Leclenche, that the wireless operator killed because of me, and I don't know what else. He keeps going on and on until I'm sick to death of it. I had my fill of scenes on that damn boat. But when I showed you that photo of you, on the hotel terrace, oh, very clever. Of course I knew straight off that you were police. I told myself, Leclenche must have talked. I got scared and told Gaston to get us out of there. Only on the way, we thought there was no point, because in the end, they'd collar us round the next corner. Not to mention the fact that we'd only got 200 francs between us. What are you going to do with me? You can't send me to jail. Do you think the wireless operator is the killer? How should I know? Do you own a pair of tan-colored shoes? Maigret suddenly asked Gaston Bouzier. Yes. Why? Oh, nothing. Just asking. Are you absolutely sure you wouldn't be able to recognize the man who killed the captain? All I saw was a man's outline in the dark. Well now, Pierre Leclenche, who was also there, hidden by the trucks, reckons the murderer was wearing tan shoes. Gaston was on his feet like a shot. His eyes were hard, and his lips curled in a snarl. He said that you're sure he said that. His anger almost choked him, reduced him to a stammer. He was no longer the same man. He banged the desk with his fist. I'm not having this. Take me to him. Where is he? By God, we'll soon see who's lying. Tan-colored shoes, and that makes me the killer, right? He's the one who took my girl. He's the one who let her off the boat, and he has the nerve to say, calm down. He could scarcely breathe. He gasped. Did you hear that, Adele? That's just like all your lover boys. Tears of rage filled both eyes. His teeth chattered. This is too much. It wasn't me who... Ha, ha, ha. This takes the biscuit. It's better than the films. And the minute it comes out that I've got 2 convictions, he's the one who is believed. So I killed Captain Follett because I was jealous of him. Is that it? What else? Oh yes, didn't I kill the wireless operator too? He ran one hand feverishly through his hair, which left it in a mess. It also made him look thinner. His eyes had darker rings under them. His complexion was duller. If you're going to arrest me, what are you waiting for? Shut up, snapped Adele. But she too had started to panic, though this did not stop her giving Gaston skeptical looks. Did she have her suspicions, or was this some sort of play-acting game? If you're going to arrest me, do it now. But I demand to confront the man. Then we'll see. Maigret had pressed an electric bell. The station duty officer showed his face warily round the door. I want you to keep the gentleman and the lady here until tomorrow, until we get a ruling from the examining magistrate. You rat, Adele yelled at him, and she spat on the floor. You want to lock me up for telling the truth. Right then. Listen to me, every word of what I just told you was made up. I'm not going to sign any statement. That'll put the tin lid on your little scheme. So this is the way. And turning to Gaston, never mind. They can't touch us. You'll see. When it comes to it, it's us who'll have the last laugh. Only thing is, a woman who's been on the Vice Squad's books, well, all she's good for is for banging up in the cells. Oh, by the way, just asking, was it me who killed the captain? Maigret left the room without listening to the rest. Outside, he filled his lungs with sea air and knocked the ash out of his pipe. He hadn't gone 10 meters when he heard Adele from inside the police station regaling officers with the choicest items of her vocabulary. It was now 2 in the morning. The night was unnaturally calm. It was high tide, and the masts of the fishing boats swayed to and fro above the roofs of the houses. And over everything, the regular murmur, wave after wave, of sea on shingle. Harsh lights surrounded the ocean. It was still being unloaded round the clock, and the dock hands strained to push the trucks as they filled with cod. The Grand Banks Café was closed. At the Hôtel de la Plage, the porter, wearing a pair of trousers over his nightshirt, opened the door for the inspector. The lobby was lit by a single lamp. It was why it took a moment before Maigret made out the figure of a woman in a rattan chair. It was Marie Léonnec. She was asleep with her head resting on one shoulder. "I think she's waiting for you," whispered the porter. She was pale and possibly anemic. There was no color in her lips, and the dark shadows under her eyes showed just how exhausted she was. She slept with her mouth open, as if she was not getting enough air. Maigret touched her gently on the shoulder. She gave a start, sat up, looked at him in a daze. "I must have dropped off. Why aren't you in bed?" "Didn't my wife see you to your room?" "Yes, but I came down again. I was very quiet. I wanted to know. Tell me." She was not as pretty as usual, because sleep had made her skin clammy. A mosquito bite had left a red spot in the middle of her forehead. Her dress, which she had probably made herself from hard-wearing serge, was creased. "Have you found out anything new?" "No. Listen, I've been thinking a lot. I don't know how to say this. Before I see Pierre tomorrow, I want you to talk to him. I want you to say that I know all about that woman, that I don't hate him for it. I'm certain, you see, that he didn't do it. But if I speak to him first, he'll feel awkward. You saw him this morning. He's all on edge. If there was a woman on board, isn't it only natural if he—" But it was too much for her. She burst into tears. She could not stop crying. And most of all, nothing must get into the papers. My parents mustn't know. They wouldn't understand. She hiccuped. "You've got to find the murderer. I think if I could question people. I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm saying. You know better than me. Only, you don't know Pierre. I'm 2 years older than him. He's like a little boy, really. Especially if you accuse him of anything. He is likely to clam up. It's pride, and not say anything. He is very sensitive. He has been humiliated too often." Maigret put his hand on her shoulder. Slowly, holding back a deep sigh. Adele's voice was still going round and round in his head. He saw her again, seductive, desirable in the full bloom of her animal presence, magnificent in her sensuality. And here was this well-brought-up anemic girl who was trying to hold back her tears and smile brightly. When you really know him, But what she would never really know was the dark cabin around which three men had circled for days, for weeks on end, far away in the middle of the ocean, while other crewmen in the engine room and in the foredeck dimly sensed that a tragedy was unfolding, kept watch on the sea, discussed changes of course, felt increasingly uneasy, and talked of the evil eye and madness. I'll talk to Leclinch tomorrow. Can I, too? Perhaps. Probably. But now, you must get some rest. A little later, Madame Maigret, still half asleep, murmured, She's very sweet. Did you know she's already got her trousseau together? All hand embroidered. Find out anything new. You smell of perfume. No doubt lingering traces of Adele's overpowering scent, which had clung to him. A scent as common as cheap wine in cheap bistros, which had, on board the trawler and for months on end, mingled with the rank smell of cod while men prowled round a cabin, as determined and pugnacious as dogs. Sleep well, he said, pulling the blanket up to his chin. The kiss he placed on the forehead of his drowsy wife was solemn and sincere. Chapter 6. The staging was basic. The setting was the same as for most confrontations of witnesses and accused. This one was taking place in a small office in the jail. Chief Inspector Gerard, of the Le Havre police, who was in charge of the investigation, sat in the only chair. Maigret stood with his elbows leaning on the mantelpiece of the black granite fireplace. On the wall were graphs, official notices, and a lithograph of the President of the French Republic. Standing in the full glare of the lamp was Gaston Bouzier. He was wearing his tan-colored shoes. Let's have the wireless operator in. The door opened. Pierre Leclanche, who had been given no warning, walked in, brow furrowed, like a man in pain who is expecting to get more of the same treatment. He saw Bouzier, but he paid him not the slightest attention and looked all round him, wondering which man he should face. On the other hand, Adele's lover looked him up and down, a supercilious smile hanging on his lips. Lich. Clinch had a crumpled air. His flesh was gray. He did not try to bluster or conceal his dejection. He was as lost as a sick animal. Do you recognize this man here? He stared at Bouzier, as if searching through his memory. No. Who is he? Take a good look at him, from head to foot. Leclinch obeyed, and the minute his eyes reached the shoes, he straightened up. Well, yes, what? I understand what you're getting at. The tan shoes. So that's it. Gaston Bouzier suddenly burst out. He had not said a word until then, but his face was now dark with anger. Why don't you tell them again that I'm the one who did your captain in go on? All eyes were on the wireless operator, who looked at the floor and gestured vaguely with one hand. Say it. Perhaps those weren't the shoes. Oh yes, Gaston crowed, already claiming victory. So you're backing down. You don't recognize the man who murdered Fallout. I don't know. No? You are probably aware that this man is the lover of a certain Adele, who you most certainly do know. He has already admitted that he was near the trawler at the moment the crime was committed. Also, that he was wearing tan-colored shoes. All this time, Bouzier was facing him down, bristling with impatience and fury. That's right, make him talk. But he'd better be telling the truth, or else I swear I'll... Hold your tongue. Well, Leclinch. The young man passed his hand over his brow and winced. Literally, with pain. I don't know. He can go hang for all I care. But you did see a man wearing tan shoes attack Falut. I forget. That's what you said when you were first interviewed. That wasn't very long ago. Are you sticking to what you said then? No. That is, look, I saw a man wearing tan shoes. That's all I saw. I don't know if he was the murderer. The longer the interview went on, the more confident Gaston Bouzier, who also looked rather seedy after a night in the cells, became. He was now shifting his weight from one leg to the other, with one hand in his trouser pocket. See, he's backing down. He doesn't dare repeat the lies he told you. Answer me this. Leclanche, thus far, we know for certain that there were 2 men near the trawler at the time. When the captain was murdered, you were one, and Bouzier the other. You say you didn't kill anybody. Now, after pointing the finger at this man, you seem to be withdrawing the accusation. So, was there a third person there? If so, then it is impossible you could not have seen him. So who was it? Silence. Pierre Leclanche continued to stare at the ground. Maigret, still leaning with elbows propped up on the fireplace, had taken no part in the interrogation. Happy to leave it to his colleague, and content just to observe the 2 men. I repeat, the question, was there a third person on the quay? I don't know, said the prisoner in a crushed voice. Is that a yes? A shrug of the shoulder, which meant, as you wish. Who was it? It was dark. In that case, tell me why you said the murderer was wearing tan shoes. Wasn't it a way of drawing attention away from the real murderer, who was someone you knew? The young man clutched his head in both hands. I can't take any more. He groaned. Answer me. No. You can do what you like. Bring in the next witness. The moment the door was open, Adele walked through it with an exaggerated swagger. She swept the room with one glance to get a sense of what had been going on. Her eye lingered in particular on the wireless operator, whom she seemed shocked to see looking so defeated. I assume, Leclanche, that you recognize this woman, whom Captain Falut hid in his cabin throughout the entire voyage, and with whom you were intimate. He looked at her coldly. Yet already Adele's lips were parting and preparing to frame a captivating smile. That's her. To cut a long story short, there were 3 of you on board who, in plain language, were sniffing around her, the captain, the chief mechanic, and you. You went to bed with her at least once. The chief mechanic got nowhere. Was the captain aware that you had deceived him? He never spoke to me about it. He was very jealous, wasn't he? And it was because he was so jealous that he didn't speak to you for 3 months. No. Was there some other reason? Now he was red-faced, not knowing which way to look, talking too fast. Well, it could have been that. I don't know. What else was there between you that might have created hatred or suspicion? There wasn't anything. You're right. He was jealous. What feelings did you have that led you to become Adele's lover? A silence. Were you in love with her? No. He sighed in a small, dry voice. But the woman screeched, Thanks a million, always the gentleman, eh? But that didn't stop you hanging around me until the very last day. Isn't that the truth? And it's also true that you probably had another girl waiting for you on shore. Gaston Bouzier pretended to be whistling under his breath, with his fingers hooked in the armholes of his waistcoat. Tell me again, Leclanche, if, when you went on board after witnessing the death of the captain, Adele was still locked inside her cabin. Locked in. Yes. So she couldn't have killed anyone. No, it wasn't her. I swear. Leclenche was getting ruffled, but Chief Inspector Gerard went on remorselessly. Bouzier states that he didn't kill anybody, but after accusing him, you withdraw the accusation. Another way of looking at it is that the pair of you were in it together. Oh, very nice. I must say, cried Bouzier in a burst of brutal contempt, when I take up crime, it won't be with all right. Both of you could have killed because you were jealous. Both of you had been sleeping with Adele. Bouzier said with a sneer. Me jealous? Jealous of what? Have any of you anything further to add? You first. Leclenche? No. Bouzier, I wish to state that I am innocent and demand to be released immediately. And you, Adele was putting on fresh lipstick. Me, a thick stroke of lipstick. A look in her mirror. I've nothing to say, not a thing. All men are skunks. You heard that boy there? The one I'm supposed to have been prepared to do silly things for. It's no good looking at me like that. Gaston. Now, if you want my opinion, there's things we know nothing about in this business with the boat. The minute you found out a woman had been on board, you thought it explained everything. But what if there was something else, such as, how should I know I'm not a detective? She crammed her hair under her red straw toque. Maigret saw Pierre Leclenche look away. The two chief inspectors exchanged glances. Gerard said Leclenche will be returned to his cell. You two will stay in the waiting room. I'll let you know whether you are free to go or not in a quarter of an hour. The two detectives were left alone. Both looked worried. Are you going to ask the magistrate to let them go? Asked Maigret. Yes, I think it's the best thing. They may be mixed up in the killing, but there are other things we may be missing. Right. Hello? Operator, get me the law courts at Le Havre. Hello? Yes. Public prosecutor's office, please. A few moments later, while Chief Inspector Gerard was talking to the magistrate, there was the sound of a disturbance outside. Maigret ran to see what was happening and saw Leclenche on the ground, struggling with three uniformed officers. He was terrifyingly out of control. His eyes were bloodshot and looked wild and staring. Spittle drooled from his mouth, but he was being held down now and couldn't move. What happened? We hadn't cuffed him, seeing as how he was always so quiet. Anyway, as we were moving him down the corridor, he made a grab for the gun in my belt. He got it, was going to use it to kill himself. I stopped him firing it. Leclenche lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling. His teeth were digging into the flesh of his lips, reddening his saliva with blood. But most disturbing were the tears which streamed down his leaden cheeks. Maybe get the doctor. No. Let him go, barked Maigret. When the prisoner was alone on his back on the stone floor. On your feet. Look sharp now. Get a move on. And no antics. Otherwise, you'll feel the back of my hand across your face, you miserable little brat. The wireless operator did what he was told, unresistingly, fearfully. His whole body trembled with the aftershock. In falling, he had dirtied his clothes. How does your girlfriend fit into that little display? Chief Inspector Gerard appeared. He agreed, he said. All three are free to go, but they mustn't leave Fécamp. What happened here? This moron tried to kill himself. If it's all right with you, I'll look after him. The two of them were walking along the quays together. Leclanche had splashed water over his face. It had not washed the crimson blotches away. His eyes were bright, feverish, and his lips too red. He was wearing an off-the-peg suit with 3 buttons, which he'd done up anyhow, not caring about what he looked like. His tie was badly knotted. Maigret, hands in pockets, walked grimly and kept muttering as if for his own benefit. "You've got to understand that I haven't got time to tell you what you should and should not do. Except for this, your fiancée is here. She's a good kid, got a lot of grit. She dropped everything and came here all the way from Quimper. She's moving heaven and earth. Maybe it wouldn't be such a good idea to dash her hopes. Does she know? There's no point in talking to her about that woman." Maigret never stopped watching him. They reached the quays. The brightly colored fishing boats were picked out by the sunshine. The streets nearby were busy. There were a few moments when Leclanche seemed to be rediscovering his zest for life, and he looked hopefully at his surroundings with optimism. At others, his eyes hardened, and he glared angrily at people and things. They had to pass close by the ocean. Now, in the final day of unloading, there were still 3 trucks, parked opposite the trawler. The inspector spoke casually as he gestured to various points in space. "You were there. Gaston Bouzier was here, and it was on that spot that the 3rd man strangled the captain." Leclanche breathed deeply, then looked away. "Only it was dark, and none of you knew who the others were. Anyway, the 3rd man wasn't the chief mechanic or the 1st mate. They were both with the crew in the Grand Banks Café. The Breton, who was outside on deck, spotted the wireless operator, went over to the hatch, and leaned his head in. 3 sailors came out and looked at Leclanche. 'Come on,' said Maigret. 'Marie Leonec is waiting for us.' 'I can't.' 'What can't you? Go there. Please leave me alone. What's it to you if I do kill myself? Anyway, it would be best for all concerned. Is the secret so heavy to bear?' Leclanche. No answer. 'And you really can't say anything? Is that it?' 'Of course you can. One thing, do you still want Adele?' 'I hate her.' 'That's not what I asked. I said want. The way you wanted her all the time. You were at sea. Just between us, man, had you had lots of girls before you met Marie Leonec?' 'No. Leastways, nothing serious.' 'And never deep urges, wanting a woman so much you could weep?' 'Never.' He sighed and looked away. 'So it started when you were on board ship. There was only one woman. The setting was uncouth, monotonous, fragrant flesh in a trawler that stank of fish. You were about to say something. 'It's nothing. You forgot all about the girl you were engaged to.' 'That's not the same thing.' Maigret looked him in the eye and was astounded by the change that had just come over it. Suddenly, the young man had acquired a determined tilt to his head. His gaze was steady, and his mouth bitter. And yet, for all that, there were traces of nostalgia and fond hopes in his expression. 'Marie Leonec is a pretty girl,' Maigret went on in pursuit of his line of thought. 'Yes, and much more refined than Adele. Moreover, she loves you. She is ready to make any sacrifice for—' 'Why don't you leave it alone?' said the wireless operator angrily. 'You know very well that it's something else, that Marie Leonec is a good, well-brought-up girl, that she will make a model wife and a caring mother, but there'll always be something missing. Isn't that so? Something more elemental, something you discovered on board, shut away inside the captain's cabin, when fear caught you by the throat. in the arms of Adele, something vulgar, brutal, the spirit of adventure, and the desire to bite, to burn your bridges, to kill or die. Leclanche stared at him in amazement. How did you? How do I know? Because everyone has had a sight of the same adventure come his way at least once in his life. We cry hot tears. We shout. We rage. Then, a couple of weeks later, you look at Marie Leonec and you wonder how on earth you could have fallen for someone like Adele. As he walked, the young man had been keeping his eyes firmly on the glinting water of the harbor. In it were reflected the reds, whites, and greens that decorated the taffrails of boats. The voyage is over. Adele has gone. Marie Leonec is here. There was a moment of calm. Maigret went on. The ending was dramatic. A man is dead because there was passion on that boat, and... But Leclanche was again in the grip of wild ideas. Stop it! Stop it! He repeated in a brittle voice. No. Surely, you can see it's not possible. He was haggard-eyed. He turned to see the trawler, which, almost empty now, sat high in the water, looming over them. Then his fears took hold of him once more. I swear, you've got to let me alone. And on board, throughout the entire voyage. The captain was also stretched to breaking point, wasn't he? What do you mean? And the chief mechanic too? No. It wasn't just the two of you. It was fear. Leclanche. Wasn't it? I don't know. Please leave me alone. Adele was in the cabin. 3 men were on the prowl. Yet the captain would not give in to his urges and refused to speak to his woman for days on end. And you looked in through the portholes, but after just one encounter, you never touched her again. Stop it. The men down in the bunkers, the crew in the foredeck, they were all talking about the evil eye. The voyage went from bad to worse, lurching from navigational errors to accidents. A ship's boy lost overboard. 2 men injured. The cod going bad. And the mess they made of entering the harbor. They turned at the end of the quay, and the beach stretched out before them, with its neat breakwater, the hotels, beach huts, and multicolored chairs dotted over the shingle. Madame Maigret, in a deck chair, was picked out by a patch of sunshine. Marie Leonec, wearing a white hat, was sitting next to her. Leclanche followed the direction of Maigret's eyes and stopped suddenly. His temples looked damp. The inspector went on. But it took more than a woman. Come on, your fiancé has seen you. And so she had. She stood up, remained motionless for a moment, as if her feelings were too much for her. And then she was running along the breakwater while Madame Maigret put down her needlework and waited. Chapter 7. It was one of those situations which crop up spontaneously from which it is difficult to get free. Marie Leonec, alone in Fécamp, had been placed under the wing of the Maigrets by a friend and had been taking her meals with them. But now her fiancé was there. All 4 of them were together on the beach when the hotel bell announced that it was time for lunch. Pierre Leclanche hesitated for a moment and looked at the others in embarrassment. Come on, said Maigret. We'll get them to lay another place. He took his wife's arm as they crossed the breakwater. The young couple followed, not speaking, or rather, only Marie spoke and did so in a firm voice. Any idea what she's telling him? The inspector asked his wife. Yes. She told me a dozen times this morning to see if I thought it was all right. She's telling him She's not cross with him about anything. Whatever it was that happened. You see, she's not going to say anything about a woman. She's pretending she doesn't know. But she did say she'd be stressing the words, whatever it was that happened. Poor girl. She'd go to the ends of the earth for him. Alas, sighed Maigret. What do you mean? Nothing. Is this our table? Lunch passed off quietly. Too quietly. The tables were set very closely together, so that speaking in a normal voice was not really possible. Maigret avoided watching Leclanche, to put him at his ease, but the wireless operator's attitude gave him cause for concern. And it also worried Marie Leonec, whose face had a pinched look to it. Her young man looked grim and depressed. He ate, he drank, he spoke when spoken to. But his thoughts were elsewhere, and more than once. Hearing footsteps behind him, he jumped, as if he sensed danger. The bay windows of the dining room were wide open, and through them could be seen the sun-flecked sea. It was hot. Leclanche had his back to the view, and from time to time, with a jerk of the head, would turn round quickly and scour the horizon. It was left to Madame Maigret to keep the conversation going, mainly by talking to the young woman about nothing in particular, to keep the silence at bay. Here they were far removed from unpleasant events. The setting was a family hotel, a reassuring clatter of plates and glasses, a half bottle of Bordeaux on the table next to a bottle of mineral water. But then the manager made a mistake. He came up as they were finishing dessert and asked, "Would you like a room to be made up for this gentleman?" He was looking at Leclanche. He had spotted a fiancée. And no doubt, he took the Maigrets for the girl's parents. 2 or 3 times, the wireless operator made the same gesture as he had that morning during the confrontation. A rapid movement of his hand across his forehead. A very boneless, weary gesture. What shall we do now? The other guests were getting up and leaving. The group of 4 were standing on the terrace. "Shall we sit down for a while?" suggested Madame Maigret. Their folding chairs were waiting for them. On the shingle, the Maigrets sat down. The 2 young people remained standing for a moment, uncertain of what they should do. "I think we'll go for a little walk, shall we?" Marie Leonec finally brought herself to say with a vague smile meant for Madame Maigret. The inspector lit his pipe, and once he was alone with his wife, he muttered, "Tell me, do I really look like the father-in-law?" "They don't know what to do. Their position is very delicate," remarked his wife as she watched them go. "Look at them. They're so awkward." "I may be wrong, but I think Marie has more backbone than her fiancé." He certainly made a sorry sight as he strolled listlessly along. A slight figure who paid no attention to the girl at his side and, you would have sworn even from a distance, did not say anything. But the girl gave the impression that she was doing her level best, that she was talking as a way of distracting him, that she was even trying to appear as if she was having a good time. There were other groups of people on the beach, but Leclanche was the only man not wearing white trousers. He was wearing a dark suit, which made him look even more pitiful. "How old is he?" asked Madame Maigret, her husband, lying back in his deck chair with eyes half closed. Said 19, "Just a boy. I'm very afraid that he'll be easy meat for anybody now." "Why, isn't he innocent? He probably never killed anybody." "No, I'd stake my life on it. But all the same, I'm afraid he's had it. Just look at him, and look at her. Nonsense. Leave the pair of them alone for a moment, and they'll be kissing. Perhaps Maigret was pessimistic. She isn't much older than him. She really loves him. She is quite ready to become a model little wife. Why do you think that it won't ever happen? Just an impression. Have you ever looked at photos of people who died young? I've always been struck by the fact that those pictures, which were taken when the subjects were fit and healthy, always have something of the graveyard about them. It's as if those who are doomed to be the victims of some awful experience already have a death sentence written on their faces. And do you think that boy? He's a sad case. Always was. He was born poor. He suffered from being poor. He worked like a slave, put his head down, like a man swimming upstream. Then he managed to persuade a nice girl from a higher social class than his to say yes. But I don't believe it'll happen. Just look at them. They're groping in the dark. They're trying to believe in happy endings. They want to believe in their star. Maigret spoke quietly, in a half-whisper, as he stared at the two outlines, which stood out against the sparkling sea. Who is officially in charge of the investigation? Gerard, a chief inspector at Le Havre. You don't know him. An intelligent man. Does he think he's guilty? No. In any case, he's got nothing solid on him. Not even any real circumstantial evidence. What do you think? Maigret turned around, as if to get a glimpse of the trawler, though it was hidden from him by a row of houses. I think that the voyage was, for two men at least, tragic. Tragic enough that Captain Follett couldn't go on living any longer, and the wireless operator couldn't go back to living his old, normal life. All because of a woman. He did not answer the question directly, but went on. And the rest of them, the men who had no part in events, all of them, including the stokers, were, if they did but know it, deeply marked by it too. They came back angry and scared. For 3 months, 2 men and a woman raised the tension around the deck house in the stern, a few black walls with portholes. But it was enough. I've hardly ever seen you get so worked up about a case. You said 3 people were involved. What on earth did they do out there in the middle of the ocean? Yes, what did they do exactly? Something which was serious enough to kill Captain Follett, and also bad enough to leave those 2 young people not knowing which way to turn. Look at them out there, trying to find what's left of their dreams in the shingle. The young people were coming back, arms swinging, uncertain whether courtesy required them to rejoin the Maigrets, or whether it would be more tactful to leave them to themselves. During their walk, Marie Leonec had lost much of her vivaciousness. She gave Madame Maigret a dejected look. It was as if all her efforts, all her high spirits, had run up against a wall of despair or inertia. It was Madame Maigret's custom to take some light refreshment of an afternoon. So, at around 4 o'clock, all 4 of them sat down on the hotel terrace under the striped umbrellas, which exuded the customary festive air. Hot chocolate steamed in 2 cups. Maigret had ordered a beer, and Leclanche, a brandy and soda. They talked about Jorison, the teacher from Quimper, who had written to Maigret on behalf of the wireless operator and had brought Marie Leonec with him. They said the usual things, "You won't find a better man anywhere." They embroidered on this theme, not out of conviction, but because they had to say something. Suddenly, Maigret blinked, then focused on a couple now walking towards them along the breakwater. It was Adèle and Gaston Bouzier. He slouched, hands in pockets, his boater tilted on the back of his head, seemingly unconcerned, while she was as animated and as eye-catching as ever. As long as she doesn't spot us, the inspector thought. But at that very moment, Adele's eye caught his. She stopped and said something to her companion, who tried to dissuade her. Too late, she was already crossing the road. She looked around at all the tables in turn, chose the one nearest to the Maigrets, then sat down so that she was facing Marie Leonec. Her boyfriend followed with a shrug, touched the brim of his boater as he passed in front of the inspector, and sat astride a chair. "What are you having?" "Not hot chocolate, that's for sure. A Kümmel." What was that, if not a declaration of war? When she mentioned chocolate, she was staring at Marie Leonec's cup. Maigret saw the girl flinch. She had never seen Adele. But surely the penny had dropped. She glanced across at Leclanche, who looked away. Madame Maigret's foot nudged her husband's twice. What say the four of us walk over to the casino? She too had worked it out. But no one answered. Only Adele at the next table said anything. "It's so hot." She sighed. "Take my jacket." "Gaston?" She removed her suit jacket and was revealed in pink silk, opulently sensual and bare-armed. She did not take her eyes off the girl for an instant. "Do you like gray? Don't you think they should ban people from wearing miserable colors on the beach?" It was so obvious. Marie Leonec was wearing gray. But Adele was demonstrating her intention to go on the attack, by any means and without wasting any time. "Waiter, shift yourself. I can't wait all day." Her voice was shrill, and it sounded as if she was deliberately exaggerating its coarseness. Gaston Bouzier scented danger. He knew Adele of old. He muttered a few words to her, but she replied in a very loud voice. "So what? They can't stop anyone sitting on this terrace. It's a free country." Madame Maigret was the only one with her back to her. Maigret and the wireless operator sat sideways on, but Marie Leonec faced her directly. "We're all as good as everybody else, isn't that right? Only there's some people who trail round after you when you're too busy to see them and then won't give you the time of day when they're in company." And she laughed. Such an unpleasant laugh. She stared at the girl, whose face flushed bright red. "Waiter, what do I owe you?" asked Bouzier, who was anxious to put a stop to this. "We've got plenty of time." "Same again. Waiter, and bring me some peanuts." "We don't have any." "Well, go and get some." "That's what you're paid for, isn't it?" There were people at two other tables. They all stared at the new couple, who could not go unnoticed. Maigret began to worry. He wanted, of course, to put an end to a scene which might turn nasty. On the other hand, the wireless operator was trapped opposite him. He could see him sit there and sweat. It was fascinating, like being present at a dissection. Leclanche did not move a muscle. He was not facing the woman, but he must surely have been able to see her, however vaguely, on his left, at the very least to make out the pink cloud of her blouse. His eyes, gray and lackluster, were fixed and staring. One hand lay on the table and was closing slowly, as slowly as the tentacles of some undersea creature. There was no telling yet how it would all turn out. Would he get up and run away? Would he turn on the woman who talked and talked? Would he? No. He did none of those things. What he did was quite different and 100 times more unnerving. It was not just his hand that was closing, but his whole being. He was shriveling, shrinking into his shell, his eyes steadily turned, as gray as his face. He did not move. Was he still breathing? Not a tremor, not a twitch, but his stillness, which grew more and more complete, was mesmerizing. Puts me in mind with another of my gentleman friends. Married he was, with 3 kids. Marie Leonec, on the other hand, was breathing quickly. She gulped down her chocolate to hide her confusion. Now he was the most passionate man on the planet. Sometimes I refused to let him in, and he'd stop outside on the landing and sob, until the neighbors worked up a right old head of steam. Adele, my sweetie pie, my pet, my own, all the usual lovey-dovey stuff. Anyway, one Sunday I met him out walking with his wife and kiddies. I heard his wife ask him, "Who's that woman?" And all pompous, he says to her, obviously a floozy, "You can tell from the ridiculous way she's dressed." And she laughed, playing to the crowd. She looked at the faces around her to see what effect her behavior was having. Some people are that slow on the uptake you can't get a rise out of them. Again, Gaston Bouzier said something to her quietly in an attempt to shut her up. "What's the matter? Not turning chicken, are you? I pay for my drinks, don't I? I'm not doing anybody any harm, so nobody's got any right to tell me what to do. Waiter, where are those peanuts? And bring another Kümmel." "Maybe we should leave," said Madame Maigret. It was too late. Adele was on the rampage. It was clear that if they tried to leave, she would do anything to cause a scene, whatever the cost. Marie Leonec was staring at the table. Her ears were red, her eyes unnaturally bright, and her mouth hung open in distress. Leclinch had shut his eyes, and he went on sitting there, unseeing, with a fixed expression on his face. His hand still lay lifelessly on the table. Maigret had never had an opportunity like this to scrutinize him. His face was both very young and very old, as is often the case with adolescents who have had difficult childhoods. Leclinch was tall, taller than average, but his shoulders were not yet those of a man. His skin, which he had not looked after, was dotted with freckles. He had not shaved that morning, and there were faint blonde shadows around his chin and on his cheeks. He was not handsome. He could not have laughed very often in his life. On the contrary, he had burned large quantities of midnight oil, reading too much, writing too much, in unheated rooms, in his ocean-tossed cabin, by the light of dim lamps. I'll tell you what really makes me sick. It's seeing people putting on airs who are really no better than us. Adele was losing patience. She was ready to try anything to get what she wanted. All these proper young ladies, for instance, they pretend to be lily-white hens, but they'll run after a man the way no self-respecting trollop would dare to. The hotel owner stood by the entrance, surveying his guests as if trying to decide whether or not he should intervene. Maigret now had eyes only for Leclinch. In close-up, his head had dropped a little. His eyes had not opened, but tears squeezed out one by one from under his clamped eyelids, oozed between the eyelashes, hesitated, and then snaked down his cheeks. It wasn't the first time the inspector had seen a man cry, but it was the first time he had been so affected by the sight. Perhaps it was the silence, the stillness of his whole body. The only signs of life it gave were those rolling, liquid pearls. The rest was dead. Marie Leonec had seen nothing of all this. Adele was still talking. Then, a split second later, Maigret knew. The hand which lay on the table had just imperceptibly opened. The other was out of sight, in a pocket. The lids rose no more than a millimeter. It was enough to allow an eye glance to filter through. That glance settled on Marie. As the inspector was getting to his feet, there was a gunshot. Everyone reacted in a confused pandemonium of screams and overturned chairs. At first, Leclanche did not move. Then he started to lean imperceptibly to his left. His mouth opened, and from it came a faint groan. Marie Leonec, who had difficulty understanding what had happened, since no one had seen a gun, flung herself on him, grabbed him by the knees and his right hand and turned in panic. "Inspector? What?" Only Maigret had worked out what had happened. Leclanche had had a revolver in his pocket, a weapon he had found God knows where, for he hadn't had one that morning when he was released from his cell. And he'd fired from his pocket. He'd been gripping the butt all the interminable time Adele had been talking, while he kept his eyes shut and waited, and maybe hesitated. The bullet had caught him in the abdomen or the side. His jacket was scorched, cut to ribbons at hip level. "Get a doctor ring for the police, comme..." Someone somewhere was shouting. A doctor appeared. He was wearing swimming trunks. He'd been on the beach hardly 100 meters from the hotel. Hands had reached out and held Leclanche up just as he began to fall. He was carried into the hotel dining room. Marie, utterly distraught, followed the stretcher inside. Maigret had not had time to worry about Adele or her boyfriend. As he entered the bar, he suddenly saw her. She looked deathly pale and was emptying a large glass, which rattled against her teeth. She had helped herself. The bottle was still in her hand. She filled the glass a second time. The inspector paid her no further attention, but retained the image of that white face above the pink blouse, and particularly the sound of her teeth chattering against the glass. He could not see Gaston Bizier anywhere. The dining room door was about to be closed. "Move along, please," the hotel owner was telling guests. "Keep calm. The doctor has asked us to keep the noise down." Maigret pushed the door open. He found the doctor kneeling and Madame Maigret restraining the frantic Marie, who was trying desperately to rush to the wounded man's side. "Police," the inspector muttered to the doctor. "Can't you get those women out of here? I'm going to have to undress him and..." "Right. I'll need a couple of men to help me. I assume someone has already phoned for an ambulance." He was still wearing his trunks. "Is it serious?" "I can't tell you anything until I've probed the wound. You do, of course, understand." Yes, Maigret understood all too well when he saw the appalling, lacerated mess, a coalescence of flesh and fabric. The tables had been laid for dinner. Madame Maigret took Marie Leonec outside. A young man in white trousers asked shyly, "If you'll allow me, I could help. I'm studying pharmacy." A burst of fierce red sunlight slanted through a window and was so blindingly bright that Maigret closed the Venetian blind. "Will you take his legs?" He recalled the words he had said to his wife that afternoon as he lounged in his folding chair, watching the gangling figure move across the beach with the smaller and livelier outline of Marie Leonec at his side. Easy meat. Captain Fallout had died as soon as he had docked. Pierre Leclanche had fought long and hard, perhaps had even still been fighting as he sat eyes closed, one hand on the table, the other in his pocket, while Adele went on talking, endlessly talking, and playing to the gallery. Chapter 8. It was a little before midnight when Maigret left the hospital. He had waited to see the stretcher being wheeled out of the operating theater. On it lay the prone figure of a tall man swathed in white. The surgeon was washing his hands. A nurse was putting the instruments away. "We'll do our best to save him," he said in reply to the inspector. "His intestine is perforated in 7 places. You could say it's a very, very nasty wound, but we've tidied him up." He gestured to receptacles full of blood, cotton wool and disinfectant. Believe me, it took a lot of damned hard work. They were all in high good humor. Surgeons, assistant surgeons, and theater nurses. They had been brought a patient as near to death's door as he could be. Blood-stained. Abdomen not only gaping, but scorched too, with scraps of clothing embedded in his flesh. And now, an ultra-clean body had just been carried out on a trolley, and the abdomen had been carefully stitched up. The rest would be for later. Maybe Leclinch would regain consciousness. Maybe not. The hospital did not even try to find out who he was. Does he really have a chance of pulling through? Why not? We used to see worse than that during the war. Maigret had phoned the Hôtel de la Plage at once to set Marie Leonec's mind at rest. Now he set out to walk back by himself. The doors of the hospital closed behind him with the smooth sound of well-oiled hinges. It was dark. The street of small middle-class houses was deserted. He had only gone a few meters when a figure stepped away from the wall and the light of a street lamp illuminated the face of Adele. In a mean voice, she asked, "Is he dead?" She must have been waiting for hours. Her features were drawn, and the kiss curls at her temples had lost their shape. "Not yet," replied Maigret in the same tone of voice. "Will he die? Maybe, maybe not. Do you think I did it on purpose?" "I don't think anything." "Because it's not true," the inspector continued on his way. She followed him, and to do so, she had to walk very quickly. Basically, it was his own fault. You must see that. Maigret pretended he wasn't even listening, but she was stubborn and persisted. "You know very well what I mean. On board, he nearly got to the point of asking me to marry him. Then once we docked, she would not give up. She seemed driven by an overmastering need to talk. If you think I'm a bad woman, it's because you don't know me. Only, there are times. Look, Inspector, you've got to tell me the truth. I know what a bullet can do, especially in the belly from point-blank range. They performed a laparotomy on him, right?" She gave the impression that she was no stranger to hospitals, that she had heard how doctors talked and knew people who'd been shot more than once. "Was the operation a success? I believe it depends on what the patient has been eating before." Her distress was not acute, more a raw, stubborn refusal to take no for an answer. "Aren't you going to say, 'But there, you know, don't you?' Why, I sounded off like that this afternoon. Gaston is a cheap crook. I never loved him. But the other one, he may live," said Maigret carefully, looking the girl straight in the eyes. "But if what happened on the ocean is not cleared up, it won't do him much good." He paused. expecting her to say something, to have a reaction. She dropped her eyes. Of course. You think that I know everything. From the moment both men were my lovers, but I swear, no. You don't know what sort of man Captain Follett was, so you'll never understand. He was in love with me. It's true. He used to come to Le Havre to see me. And falling, I mean really falling, for a woman at his age turned his brain. But that did not stop him being pernickety about everything. Very controlled. Very fatty about wanting everything just so. I still can't work out why he ever agreed to let me hide on board. But what I do know is the minute we were out on the open sea, he regretted it. And because he regretted it, he began to hate me. His character changed just like that. But the wireless operator hadn't spotted you yet. No, that didn't happen until the fourth night. Like I told you, are you quite sure that Follett was already ready in a strange mood before then? Maybe not quite as strange, but afterwards, there were days when it all got weird, and I wondered if he wasn't actually mad. And you had no idea about what the reason for the change might have been. No, I thought about it. Sometimes I told myself there had to be some funny business going on between him and the wireless operator. I even thought they were involved in smuggling. You won't ever get me to go anywhere near a fishing boat again. Can you believe that it went on for 3 months and then for it to end like that? One is murdered as soon as he steps ashore and the other who... It is true, isn't it, that he's not dead? They had reached the quays, and the young woman seemed reluctant to go any further. Where is Gaston Bouzier? Back at the hotel. He knows it's not the moment to rub me up the wrong way, that I'd dump him if he says one word out of play. Are you going back to him now? She gave a shrug, a gesture which signified, why not? And then there was a glimpse of her flirtatious self. Just as she was taking her leave of Maigret, she murmured, with an awkward smile, "Thank you so much, Inspector. You've been ever so kind. But she didn't dare say the rest. It was an invitation, a promise. All right, all right." He growled and walked on. He pushed open the door of the Grand Banks Café. Just as he reached for the latch, he clearly heard a hubbub coming from inside the bar, like a dozen men's voices, all talking at once. The moment the door opened, complete silence fell with brutal abruptness. Yet there were more than 10 men there, in 2 or 3 groups, who must have been calling to each other from one table to the next. The landlord stepped forward to meet Maigret and shook his hand, though not without a certain unease of manner. Is it true what they're saying that Le Clinch shot himself? His customers toyed with their drinks in a show of indifference. Present were Louis, the black sailor, the chief mechanic from the trawler, and a few others, besides whom Maigret had finally got to know by sight. Quite true, he said. He observed that the chief mechanic, looking suddenly very shifty, kept fidgeting on the oilcloth of the bench seat. Some voyage, muttered someone in a corner, in a pronounced Norman accent. The words probably were a fair expression of the general opinion, for many heads dropped. A fist was brought down on a marble tabletop, while one voice echoed the sentiment, yes, a voyage of the damned. But Léon gave a cough to remind his customers to watch what they said, and with a nod to them motioned towards a sailor in a red jerkin, who was drinking alone in a corner. Maigret sat down near the counter and ordered a brandy and soda. No one was talking now. Every man there was trying to look calm and unruffled. Léon, a practiced master of ceremonies, called out to the group sitting around the largest table, "Want me to bring the dominoes?" It was a way of breaking the silence, of occupying hands. The black-backed dominoes were shuffled on the marble tabletop. The landlord sat down next to the inspector. "I shut them up," he said quietly, "because the fellow in the far corner, to your left, by the window, is the father of the boy. You know who I mean." "What boy?" "The ship's boy, Jean-Marie, the one who fell overboard on their third day out." The man had his head on one side and was listening. If he hadn't heard the words, he had certainly understood that they concerned him. He called to the serving girl to refill his glass and downed it in one. With a shudder of disgust, he was already drunk. He had bulging, light blue eyes, which were now more sea green. A quid of tobacco raised a lump in his cheek. Does he go out on the Grand Banks boats too? He used to. But now that he's got 7 kids, he goes out after herring in winter, because the periods away are shorter a month to start with, and then for increasingly shorter spells as the fish go south. And in summer, he fishes for himself, lays dragnets, lobster pots. The man was sitting on the same bench seat as Maigret, at the far end of it. But the inspector had a good view of him in a mirror. He was short, with wide shoulders. He was a typical northern sailor, squat, fleshy, with no neck, pink skin, and fair hair. Like most fishermen, his hands were covered with scars of old ulcers. Does he usually drink this much? They're all hard drinkers, but he's been really knocking it back since his boy died. Seeing the ocean again hit him hard. The man was now staring at them, openly insolent. "What you after?" Then he spluttered at Maigret. "Nothing at all." All the mariners followed the scene without interrupting their game of dominoes. "Because you'd better out with it. A man's not entitled to have a drink. Is that it?" "Not at all." "Go on. Say it. Say I'm not entitled to have a sup or two." He repeated with the obstinacy of a drunk. The inspector's eye picked out the black armband he wore on one sleeve of his red jerkin. "So, what you up to, then? Sneaking around here, the pair of you, talking about me." Leon shook his head, advising Maigret not to reply, and went over to his customer. "Easy now. Don't go kicking up a fuss. Canute, the inspector's not talking about you, but about the lad who shot himself. Serve him right. Is he dead? No. Maybe they can save him. Too bad. I wish they'd all die." The words had an immediate impact. All heads turned to stare at Canute, who felt the urge to shout it ever louder. "That's right. The whole lot of you." Leon was worried. He looked imploringly at everyone there, adding a gesture of helplessness in Maigret's direction. "Go home. Go to bed. Your wife will be waiting up. Don't give a damn. In the morning. You won't feel like going out to clear your nets." The drunk sniggered. Louis took the opportunity to call to Julie. "How much does it come to?" "Both rounds." "Yes. Put it on the slate. Tomorrow I'll get my advance pay before I sail." He got to his feet. The Breton automatically followed his lead as if he were his shadow. He tipped his cap. Then he did it again for Maigret's particular benefit. "Bunch of chicken hearts," muttered the drunk as the 2 men walked past him. "Cowards, the whole lot of them." The Breton clenched his fists and was about to say something, but Louis dragged him away. "Go home to bed," Leon repeated. "Anyway, it's closing time. I'll go when everybody else goes. My money's as good as the next man's." "Right." He looked around for Maigret. It was as if he was ready to start an argument. "It's like the big fellow there. What's he trying to ferret out?" He was referring to the inspector. Leon was on tenterhooks. The last customers lingered, sure that something was about to happen. Second thoughts. I think I'd rather go home. What do I owe you? He fumbled beneath his jerkin and produced a leather wallet, threw a few greasy notes on the table, stood up, swayed, and staggered to the door, which he had difficulty opening. He kept muttering indistinctly what might have been insults or threats. Once outside, he pressed his face to the window for a last look at Maigret, flattening his nose against the steamed-up glass. It hit him real hard, sighed Leon, returning to his seat. He had just the one son. All his other kids are girls, which is to say they don't count. What are they saying here? Asked Maigret. About the wireless operator. They don't know anything. So they make things up, fanciful tales, such as, oh, I don't know. They're always on about the evil eye. Maigret sensed that there was a keen eye watching him. It belonged to the chief mechanic, who was sitting at the table opposite. Has your wife stopped being jealous? The inspector asked. Given that we sail in the morning, I'd like to see her try to keep me stuck in Wyport. Is the ocean leaving tomorrow? With the tide, yes. If you think the owners intend to let her fester in the harbor. Have they found a new captain? Some retired master or other who hasn't been at sea for 8 years. And on top of that, he was then skipper of a 3-masted bark. It'll be no fun. And the wireless operator, some kid they've got straight out of college, some big technical school. They said it was. And is the first mate coming back? They recalled him, sent him a cable. He'll be here in the morning. And the crew, the usual story. They take whatever's hanging around the docks. It always works. Doesn't it? Have they found a ship's boy? The chief mechanic looked at him sharply. Yes, he said curtly. Glad to be off. No reply. The chief mechanic ordered another grog. Leon, keeping his voice low, said, We've just had news of the Pacific, which was due back this week. She's a sister ship of the Ocean. She sank in less than 3 minutes after splitting her seams on a rock. All hands lost. I've got the first mate's wife staying upstairs. She came from Rouen to meet her husband. She spends every day down by the harbor mouth. She doesn't know yet. The company is waiting for confirmation before breaking the news. It's the design of those boats, growled the chief mechanic, who had overheard. The black sailor yawned and rubbed his eyes, but was not thinking of leaving just yet. The abandoned dominoes formed a complicated pattern on the gray rectangle of the tabletop. So, in a word, Maigret said slowly, no one has any idea why the wireless operator tried to kill himself. His words met with an obstinate silence. Did all the men there know why? Was this the Freemasonry of seamen taken to an extreme, closing ranks against landlubbers who poke their noses into their business? What do I owe you, Julie? Asked Maigret. He stood up, paid, headed wearily to the door. 10 pairs of eyes followed him. He turned, but saw only faces that were blank or resentful. Even Leon, for all his barkeeper's chumminess, stood shoulder to shoulder with his customers. It was low tide. All that could be seen of the trawler was the funnel and the derricks. The trucks had all gone. The quay was deserted. A fishing boat, with its white light swinging at the end of its mast, was slowly moving away towards the jetties, and the sound of 2 men talking could be heard. Maigret filled one last pipe, looked across the town and the towers of the Palais de la Bénédictine, at the foot of which were walls which were part of the hospital. The windows of the Grand Banks Café punctuated the quay with two rectangles of light. The sea was calm. There was a faint murmur of water lapping the shingle and the wooden piles of the jetties. The inspector stood on the edge of the quay. Thick hawsers, the ones holding the Ocean fast, were coiled round bronze bollards. He leaned over. Men were battening down the hatches over the holds in which salt had been stowed earlier that day. One of them was very young, younger than Leclinche. He was wearing a suit and, leaning against the wireless room, was watching the sailors as they worked. It could only be the replacement for the wireless operator who not long since had put a bullet in his own belly. He was smoking a cigarette, taking shallow, nervous pulls on it. He'd come straight from Paris, fresh out of the National Technical School. He was apprehensive. Perhaps he dreamed of adventure. Maigret could not tear himself away. He was rooted there by a feeling that the mystery was close, within his grasp, that he had to make just one last effort. Suddenly, he turned, sensing a strange presence behind him. In the dark, he made out a red jerkin and a black armband. The man had not seen him, or at least was not paying him any attention. He was walking along the lip of the quayside, and it was a miracle that in the state he was in, that he did not go over the edge. The inspector now had only a rear view of him. He had a feeling that the drunk, overcome by dizziness, was about to fall down onto the deck of the trawler, but no, he was talking to himself. He laughed derisively. He brandished a fist. Then he spat. Once, twice, 3 times on the boat below. He spat to express his total and utter disgust, after which, doubtless having relieved his feelings, he wandered off. Not in the direction of his house, which was in the fisherman's quarter, but towards the lower end of town, where there was a bar still with its lights on. Chapter 9. From the cliff side of the town came a silvery chime. It was the clock of the Palais de la Bénédictine. Striking 1. Maigret, his hands clasped behind him, was walking back to the Hôtel de la Plage. But the further he went, the slower he walked, until he finally came to a complete stop halfway along the quay. In front of him was his hotel, his room, and his bed. A welcoming, comforting combination. Behind him, he turned his head. He saw the trawler's funnel, from which smoke was gently rising, for the boilers had just been lit. Fécamp was asleep. There was a wide splash of moonlight in the middle of the harbor. The wind was rising, blowing in off the sea, raw and almost freezing, like the breath of the ocean itself. Maigret turned back wearily, reluctantly. Again he stepped over the hawsers coiled round the bollards, then stood on the side of the quay, staring down at the Ocean. His eyes were small, his mouth threatening. His hands were bunched into fists deep in his pockets. Here was Maigret in solitary mood, disgruntled, withdrawn. When he digs his heels in defiantly and is not afraid of making a fool of himself. It was low tide. The deck of the trawler was 4 or 5 meters below the level of the quay, but a plank had been laid between the quayside and the bridge. It was thin and narrow. The sound of the surf was growing louder. The tide must be on the turn. Pallid waves ate imperceptibly into the shingle of the beach. Maigret stepped onto the plank, which bent into the arc of a circle when he reached the middle. His soul squealed when he reached the iron bridge. But he did not go any further. He sat down on the seat of the officer of the watch, behind the wheel and the compass, from which dangled Captain Fallout's thick sea mittens. Maigret settled in the way grim dogs crouch stubbornly by the mouth of a burrow where they have got a scent of something. Jorison's letter, his friendship with Leclanche, all the steps taken by Marie Leonec were no longer the issue. It was now personal. He had formed a picture of Captain Fallout. He had met the wireless operator, Adele, and the chief mechanic. He had gone to considerable lengths to get a sense of the whole way of life on board the trawler. But it was not enough. Something was eluding him. He felt he understood everything, except, crucially, what was at the heart of the case. Fécamp was asleep. On board, the sailors were in their bunks. The inspector slumped heavily in the seat of the officer of the watch. Round-shouldered, legs slightly apart, his elbows on his knees. His eye settled on random details. The gloves, for instance, huge, misshapen, which Fallout would have worn during his spells on the bridge and had left hanging there, and half turning, he looked back over the afterdeck. Ahead were the full sweep of the deck, the foredeck, and very near. The wireless room, the sound of water lapping, a barely perceptible surge as the steam began to stir. Now that the furnace had been lit and water filled the boilers, the boat felt more alive than it had in the last few days. And wasn't Lewis asleep below? Next to the bunkers full of coal. To the right was the lighthouse. At the end of one jetty, a green light, a red light at the head of the next, and the sea a great black hole emitting a strong, heavy smell. There was no conscious effort of the mind involved, not in the strict sense. Maigret let his eye roam slowly, sluggishly, seeking to bring his surroundings to life, to acquire a feel for them. Gradually, he slipped into something akin to a state of trance. It was a night like this, but colder, because spring had scarcely begun. The trawler, tied up at the same berth, a thin spiral of smoke rising from the funnel. A few sleeping men. Pierre Leclanche, who had dined at Quimper in his fiancée's house. Family atmosphere. Marie Leonec had doubtless shown him to the door, so that they could kiss unobserved. And he had traveled all night. Third class. He would return in 3 months. He would see her again. Then another voyage, and after that, when it was winter, around Christmas time, they would marry. He had not slept. His sea chest was on the rack. It contained provisions made for him by his mother. At the same time, Captain Fallout was leaving the small house in Rue d'Étretat, where Madame Bernard was asleep. Captain Fallout was probably uneasy and very troubled, racked in advance by guilt. Was it not tacitly agreed that one day he would marry his landlady? Yet all winter he had been going to Le Havre, sometimes 3 times a week, to see a woman he dared not show his face with in Fécamp, a woman he was keeping as his mistress, a woman who was young, attractive, desirable, but whose vulgarity gave her an aura of danger. a respectable man of regular, fastidious habits, a model of probity, held up as an example by his employers, whose sea logs were masterpieces of detailed record-keeping. And now he was making his way through the sleeping streets to the station where Adele was due to arrive. Perhaps he was still hesitating, but 3 months. Would he find her waiting for him when he got back? Wasn't she too alive, too eager for life not to deceive him? She was a very different kind of woman from Madame Bernard. She did not spend her time keeping her house tidy, polishing brasses and floors, making plans for the future. Absolutely not. She was a woman whose image was fixed on his retina in ways that brought a flush to his cheek and quickened his breath. Then she was there. She laughed with that tantalizing laugh, which was almost as sensual as her inviting body. She thought it would be fun to sail away, to be hidden on board, to have a great adventure. But should he not tell her that the adventure would not be much fun, that being at sea, cooped up in a locked cabin, would be an ordeal? He vowed that he would, but he didn't dare. When she was there, when her breasts heaved as she laughed, he was incapable of saying anything sensible. "Are you going to smuggle me on board tonight?" They walked on. In the bars and the Grand Banks Café, members of the crew went on the spree with the advance on their wages they'd been paid that afternoon. And Captain Fallout, short, smartly turned out, grew paler the nearer he got to the harbor, to his boat. Now he could see the funnel. His throat was dry. Perhaps there was still time, but Adele was hanging on his arm. He could feel her leaning against him, warm and trembling with excitement. Maigret, facing the quayside, which was now deserted. Imagine the two of them. "Is that your ship? It smells bad. Have we got to go across on this plank?" They walked over the gangway. Captain Fallout was nervous and told her to not try to make a noise. "Is this the wheel for driving the ship?" "Shh." They went down the iron ladder. They were on the deck. They went into the captain's cabin. The door closed behind them. "Yes, that's how it was," muttered Maigret. "There they are now, the pair of them. It's the first night on board." He wished he could fling back the curtain of night, reveal the pallid sky of first light, and make out the figures of the crew staggering, slowed by alcohol. As they made their way back to the boat, the chief mechanic arrived from Wieport by the first morning train. The first mate was on the way from Paris and Leclanche from Quimper. The men tumbled onto the deck, argued in the foredeck about bunks, laughed, changed their clothes, and re-emerged stiffly in oilskins. There was a boy, Jean-Marie, the ship's boy. His father had brought him, leading him by the hand. The sailors jostled him, made fun of his boots, which were too big, and of the tears already welling in his eyes. The captain was still in his cabin. Finally, he opened the door. He closed it carefully behind him. He was curt, very pale, and his features were drawn. "Are you the wireless operator?" "Right. I'll give you your orders in a little while. Meanwhile, take a look round the wireless room." Hours passed. Now the boat's owner stood on the quay. Women and mothers were still arriving with parcels for the men who were about to sail. Fallout shook, fearful for his cabin, whose door was not to be opened at any price, because Adele, disheveled, mouth half open, was sprawled sideways, fast asleep, across the bed, a touch of the early morning nausea, which was felt not only by Falut, but by all the men who had toured the bars of the town or traveled there overnight by train. One by one, they drifted away to the Grand Banks Café, where they drank coffee laced with spirits. "See you soon, if we come back." A loud blast of the ship's horn, then two more, the women and children, after one last hug, rushing towards the end of the breakwater, the ship's owner shaking Falut's hand. The hawsers were cast off. The trawler slid forward, moved clear of the quay. Then Jean-Marie, the ship's boy, choking with fright, stamped his feet in desperation and thought of making a bid to get back to dry land. Falut had been sitting where Maigret was sitting now, half ahead, 150 turns, full steam ahead. Was Adele still asleep? Would she be woken up by the first swell and be nervous? Falut did not move from the seat which had been his for so many years. Ahead of him was the sea, the Atlantic. His nerves were taut, for he now realized what a stupid thing he had done. It had not seemed so serious when he was ashore. 2 points port, and then there were shouts, and the group on the breakwater rushed forward. A man who had clambered up the derrick to wave goodbye to his family had fallen on to the deck. "Stop engine! A stern engine! Stop engine!" There was no sign of life from the cabin. Wasn't there still time to put the woman ashore? Rowing boats approached the vessel, which was now stationary between the jetties. A fishing boat was asking for right-of-way. But the man was injured. He would have to be left behind. He was lowered into a dinghy. The women were demoralized. They were deeply superstitious. On top of which, the ship's boy had to be restrained from jumping into the water because he was so terrified of leaving a head steam. Half full. Leclinch was settling into his workplace, headphones on head, testing the instruments. And there, in his domain, he was writing My Darling Girl. "It's 8 in the morning, we're off. Already we can't see the town," and Maigret lit a fresh pipe and got to his feet so that he would have a better view of his surroundings. He was in full possession of the characters in the case and, in a sense, was now able to move them around like counters on the boat which lay spread out before him. First meal in the narrow officer's mess. Falut, the first mate, the chief mechanic, and the wireless operator. The captain announces that henceforth he will be taking all his meals in his cabin, alone. They have never heard the like of it. Such an outlandish idea. They all try in vain to come up with a reason for it. Maigret, clasping his hand to his forehead, muttered, "It's the ship's boy's job to take the captain his food. The captain opens the door, only part of the way, or else hides Adele under the bed, which he has propped up. The two of them have to make do with a meal for one. The first time, the woman laughs. And no doubt Falut leaves nearly all his share to her. He is too solemn. She makes fun of him. She is nice to him. He unbends. He smiles. And up in the foredeck, are they not already muttering about the evil eye? Aren't they talking about the captain's decision to eat by himself? And moreover, whoever saw a captain walking around with the key to his cabin in his pocket? The twin screws turn. The trawler has acquired the sense of unease which will continue to fill it for 3 months. Below deck, Men like Louis shovel coal into the maw of the furnaces for 8 or 10 hours a day, or keep a drowsy eye on the oil pressure gauge. 3 days. That's the general view. It has taken just 3 days to create an atmosphere of anxiety. And it was at that point that the crew began wondering if Fallout was mad. Why was it jealousy? But Adele stated that she didn't see Leclanche until about day 4. Until then, he is too busy with his new equipment. He tunes in and listens. For his personal satisfaction, he makes trial transmissions, and with his headphones constantly on his head, he writes page after page as if the postman was standing by to whisk his letters away and deliver them to his fiancée. 3 days, hardly time to get to know one another. Perhaps the chief mechanic, peering through portholes, has caught sight of the young woman. But he never mentioned it. The atmosphere on board builds only gradually as the crew are drawn together through shared adventures. But as yet, there are no adventures to share. They have not yet even started to fish. For that, they must wait until they reach the Grand Banks, yonder, off Newfoundland, on the other side of the Atlantic, where they will not be for another 10 days yet. At the earliest, Maigret was standing on the bridge, and any man waking then and seeing him would have wondered what he was doing there. An imposing, solitary figure calmly surveying his surroundings. And what was he doing? He was trying to understand. All the characters were in position, each with a particular outlook, and all with their own preoccupations. But after this point, there was no way of guessing the rest. There was a large gap. The inspector had only witnesses to rely upon. It was on about the 3rd day out that Captain Fallout and the wireless operator started thinking of each other as enemies. Each had a revolver in his pocket. They seemed afraid of each other. Yet Leclanche was not yet Adele's lover. But from that moment, the captain behaved as if he was mad. They are now in the middle of the Atlantic. They have left the regular lanes used by the great liners. Now, they hardly ever sight even other trawlers, English or German, as they steam towards their fishing grounds. Does Adele start to grumble and complain about being cooped up? Wondered if he wasn't actually mad. Everyone agrees that mad is the right word, and it seems unlikely that Adele alone is responsible for bringing about such an astonishing change in a well-adjusted man who has always made a religion of order. She has not deceived him yet. He has allowed her 2 or 3 turns around the deck at night, provided she takes multiple precautions. So, why is he behaving as if he is actually mad? Here the evidence of witnesses begins to mount up. He gives the order to anchor the trawler in a position where, for as long as anyone can remember, no one ever caught a single cod. He is not an excitable man or a fool, nor does he lose his temper easily. He is a steady, upstanding citizen of careful habits who for a time dreamed of sharing his life with his landlady, Madame Bernard, and of ending his days in the house full of embroidery in Rue de Tretat. There's one accident after another. When we finally get onto the banks and start catching fish, it gets salted in such a way that it's going bad by the time we get back. Fallout is no novice. He's about to retire. Until now, no one has ever had reason to question his competence. He takes all his meals in his cabin. He doesn't talk to me, Adele will say. He goes for days, weeks sometimes, without saying a word to me. And then suddenly it comes over him again. A sudden wave of sensuality. She's there, in his cabin. He shares her bed, and for weeks on end he manages to stay at arm's length until the temptation proves too strong. Would he behave this way if his only grievance was jealousy? The chief mechanic prowls round the cabin, licking his lips, but he doesn't have the nerve to force the lock. And finally, the epilogue. The Ocean is on the way home to France, laden with badly salted cod. Is it during the voyage back that the captain draws up what is virtually his will, in which he says no one should be accused of causing his death? If so, he clearly wants to die. He intends to kill himself. No one on board, except him, is capable of taking a ship's bearings. And he has enough of the seafaring spirit to bring his boat back to port first. Kill himself because he has infringed regulations by taking a woman to sea with him. Kill himself because insufficient salt was used on the fish, which will sell for a few francs below the market rate. Kill himself because the crew, bewildered by his odd conduct, believe that he is a lunatic. The captain, the most cool-headed, the most scrupulously careful master in all Fécamp. The same man whose logbooks are held up as models, the man who for so long has been living in the peaceful house of Madame Bernard. The steam vessel docks. The members of the crew rush on shore and make a beeline for the Grand Banks Café, where they can at last get a proper drink. And every man, Jack of them, is stamped with the mark of mystery. On certain questions, they all remain silent. They are all on edge. Is it because a captain has behaved in ways that no one understands? Fallotte goes on shore alone. He will have to wait until the quays are deserted before he can disembark Adèle. He takes a few steps forwards. Two men are hiding the wireless operator and Gaston Buzier, the girl's lover, but the captain is jumped by a third man, who strangles him and drops his body into the harbor. And all this happened at the very spot where the Ocean is now gently rocking on the black water. The body had got tangled in the anchor chain. Maigret was smoking. He scowled. Even at the first interview, Leclanche lies when he talks about a man wearing tan-colored shoes who killed Fallotte. Now, the man with the tan-colored shoes is Buzier. When he is brought face to face with him, Leclanche retracts his statement. Why would he lie about this, if not to protect a third person? In other words, the murderer. And why wouldn't Leclanche name him? He does no such thing. He even lets himself be put behind bars instead of him. He makes little effort to defend himself, even though there is every likelihood that he will go down for murder. He is grim, like a man riddled with guilt. He does not dare look either his fiancée or Maigret in the eye. One small detail. Before returning to the trawler, he headed back to the Grand Banks Café. He went up to his room. He burned a number of papers. When he gets out of jail, he isn't happy, even though Marie Léonec is there, encouraging him to look on the bright side. And somehow he manages to get hold of a revolver. He is afraid. He hesitates. For a long time, he just sits there, eyes closed, finger on the trigger, and then he fires. As the night wore on, it turned cooler, and the smell of seaweed and iodine weighed more strongly on the breeze. The trawler had risen by several meters. The deck was now level with the quayside, and the push and drag of the tide caused the boat to buck sideways and made the gangway creak. Maigret had forgotten how tired he was. The hardest time was over. It would soon be dawn. He summarized Captain Fallout, who had been retrieved dead from the anchor chain. Adele and Gaston Bouzier, who argued all the time, reached the stage where they could not stand each other and yet had no one else to turn to. Leclanche, who had been wheeled out on a trolley, swathed in white, from the operating theater, and Marie Leonec, not forgetting the men in the Grand Banks Café, who, even when drunk, seemed haunted by painful memories. The third day, Maigret said aloud, that's where I need to look. Something much worse than jealousy, but something which flowed directly from the presence of Adele on board the boat. The effort took it out of him. The effect of the strain on all his mental faculties. The boat rocked gently. A light came on in the foredeck, where the sailors were about to get up. The third day, his throat contracted. He looked down on the afterdeck and then along the quay, where, hours before, a man had leaned over and brandished a fist. Maybe it was partly the effect of the cold, and maybe not. But either way, he suddenly shivered. The third day, the ship's boy, Jean-Marie, who kicked up a fuss because he did not want to go to sea, was swept overboard by a wave at night. Maigret's eye ran round the whole deck, as if trying to determine where the accident had happened. There were only two witnesses, Captain Fallout and the wireless operator, Pierre Leclanche. The next day, or the day after that, Leclanche became Adele's lover. It was a turning point. Maigret did not loiter for another second. Someone was stirring in the foredeck. No one saw him stride across the plank connecting the boat to dry land, with his hands in his pockets, his nose blue with the cold, unsmiling. He returned to the Hôtel de la Plage. It was not yet light, yet it was no longer night, because out at sea, the crests of waves were picked out in crude white, and gulls were light flecks against the sky. A train whistled in the station. An old woman set out for the rocks, a basket on her back and a hook in her hand, to look for crabs. Chapter 10. When Maigret left his room and came downstairs at around 8 that morning, his head felt empty and his chest woolly, the way a man feels when he has drunk too much. "Aren't things going the way you'd like?" asked his wife. He had given a shrug, and she had not insisted. But there on the terrace of the hotel, facing a frothing, sly green sea, he found Marie Leonec, and she was not alone. There was a man sitting at her table. She stood up quickly and stammered to the inspector, "May I introduce my father? He's just got here." The wind was cool, the sky overcast, the gulls skimmed the tops of the water. "An honor to meet you, sir. Deeply honored, and most happy." Maigret looked at him without enthusiasm. He was short, and would not have been any more ridiculous to look at than the next man but for his nose, which was disproportionately large. Being the size of 3 normal noses and, furthermore, was stippled, like a strawberry, it wasn't his fault. But it was a physical affliction, and it was all anyone saw. When he spoke, it was the only thing people looked at, so that it was impossible to feel any sympathy for him. "You must join us in a little." "Thank you. No. I've just had breakfast. Perhaps a small glass of something, to warm the cockles." No, really. He was insistent. Is it not a form of politeness to make people drink when they don't want to? Maigret observed him and observed his daughter, who, apart from that nose, bore him a strong resemblance. By looking at her in this light, he was able to get a picture of what she would be like in a dozen years, when the bloom of youth had faded. I'll come straight to the point, Inspector. That's my motto. And I've traveled all night to do just that. When Jorison came to me and said that he would accompany my daughter, I gave him my permission. So I don't think anyone could say that I'm at all narrow-minded. Unfortunately, Maigret was anxious to be elsewhere. Then there was the nose, and also the pompous tone of the middle-class worthy who likes the sound of his own voice. Even so, it's my duty as a father to keep myself fully informed. Don't you agree? Which is why I'm asking you to tell me, in your heart and conscience, if you think this young man is innocent. Marie Léonec did not know where to look. She must have known deep down that her father's initiative was unlikely to help arrange matters as long as she had been by herself. Rushing to the aid of her fiancé, she had seemed rather admirable, or at any rate, she made a touching figure. But now, inside the family, it was another matter. There was more than a whiff here of the shop back in Quimper. The discussions which had preceded her departure, the tittle-tattle of the neighbors. Are you asking me if he killed Captain Fallout? Yes. You must understand that it is essential that... Maigret stared straight in front of him in his most detached manner. Well, he noticed the girl's hands, which were shaking. No, he didn't kill him. Now, if you'll excuse me, there's something I really must attend to. I shall doubtless have the pleasure of meeting up with you later. Then he turned tail. He fled so fast that he knocked over a chair on the terrace. He assumed that father and daughter were startled, but did not turn round to find out. Once on the quay, he followed the paved walkway. The ocean was some distance away. Even so, he noticed that a number of men had arrived with their sailors' kit bags slung over their shoulders and were getting their first sight of the boat. A cart was unloading bags of potatoes. The company's man was there, with his polished boots and his pencil behind his ear. There was a great deal of noise coming from the Grand Banks Café. Its doors were open, and Maigret could just make out Louis holding forth in the middle of a circle of the new men. He did not stop. Though he saw the landlord making a sign to him, he hurried on his way. 5 minutes later, he was ringing the bell of the hospital. Bye. The registrar was very young. Visible under his white coat were a suit in the latest fashion and an elegant tie. The wireless operator. It was I who took his temperature and pulse this morning. He's doing as well as can be expected. Has he come round? Oh, yes. He hasn't spoken to me, but his eyes followed me around all the time. Is it all right if I talk to him about important matters? The registrar waved a hand vaguely, an indifferent gesture. Don't see why not. If the operation has been a success and he hasn't got a temperature, then you want to see him? Pierre Leclanche was by himself in a small room with distempered walls. The air was hot and humid. He watched Maigret coming towards him. His eyes were bright, and there was not a trace of anxiety in them. As you see, he's making excellent progress. He'll be on his feet in a week. On the other hand, there's a chance that he'll be left with a limp, for a tendon in his hip was severed, and he'll have to take care. Would you prefer it if I leave you alone with him? It was really quite disconcerting. The previous evening, a bleeding, unwholesome mess had been brought which could not possibly, it seemed, have harbored the faintest breath of life. And now, Maigret found a white bed, a face that was slightly drawn, and a little pale, which was more tranquil now than he had ever seen it. And there was what looked like serenity in those eyes. That is perhaps why he hesitated. He paced up and down the room, leaned his head for a moment against the double window, from which he could see the port and the trawler, where men in red jerkins were busily moving about. "Do you feel strong enough to talk to me?" he growled, firing the question without warning as he turned to face the bed. Leclinch assented with a faint nod of his head. "You are aware that I am not officially involved in this case. My friend Jorison asked me to prove your innocence. It is done. You are not the killer of Captain Fallout." He sighed deeply. Then, to get it over with, he put his head down and charged, "Tell me the truth about what happened on the third day out. I mean about the death of Jean-Marie." He avoided looking directly at the patient. He filled a pipe as a way of appearing casual, and when the silence went on and on, he murmured, "It was evening. There were only Captain Fallout and you on deck. Were you standing together?" "No." "The captain was walking near the afterdeck." "Yes. I just left my cabin. He didn't see me. I watched him because I felt there was something odd about the way he was behaving." "You didn't know at that point that there was a woman on board?" "No. I thought that, if he was being so careful about keeping his door locked, it was because he was storing smuggled goods inside." The voice was weary, and yet it became suddenly more emphatic, for he said distinctly, "It was the most terrible thing I ever saw. An inspector who talked, tell me," and he closed his eyes, exactly as he had, as he sat waiting for the moment when he would fire a bullet through his pocket into his belly. Nobody. The captain was strolling on deck, feeling apprehensive, no doubt, just as he had ever since he'd left port. Was there anybody at the wheel? A helmsman? He couldn't see us because it was dark. The ship's boy showed up. Leclinch interrupted him by heaving himself half up, both hands gripping the rope hanging from the ceiling, which enabled him to change his position. "Where's Marie?" "At the hotel. Her father has just come." "To take her back." "Fair enough. He should take her home. But whatever happens, she mustn't come here." He was getting worked up. His voice was flatter and its flow more broken. Maigret could sense that his temperature was climbing. His eyes were becoming unnaturally bright. "I don't know who has been talking to you, but it's time I told you everything." His agitation had reached such a pitch and was so vehement that he looked and sounded as if he was almost raving. "It was awful. You never saw the kid. Skinny's not the word. Wore clothes made from an old, cut-down canvas suit of his father's. On the first day, he'd been scared and he blubbed. How can I explain? Afterwards, he got his own back by playing nasty tricks on people. What do you expect at his age? Do you know what a little brat is? Well, that was him. Twice I caught him reading the letters I wrote to my fiancée. He'd just look me brazenly in the eye and say, 'Writing to your bit of fluff.' That evening, I think the captain was walking up and down because he was too jumpy to sleep. There was quite a swell on. From time to time, a green sea would wash over the foredeck rail and flood across the metal plates of the deck. But it wasn't a storm. I was maybe 10 meters from them. I only heard a few words, but I could see their shapes. The kid was on his high horse. He was laughing, and the captain stood there, his neck sunk in his jerkin and his hands in his pockets. Jean-Marie had talked about my bit of fluff, and he must have been taking the same sort of rise out of Falou. He had a piercing voice. I remember catching a couple of words, and if I ever told everybody how, I didn't understand until later. He'd found out that the captain was hiding a woman in his cabin. He was full of himself. There was a swagger about him. He wasn't aware of how vindictive he was being. Then this is what happened. The captain raised one hand to give him a cuff over the ear. The kid was very nimble and ducked. Then he shouted something, probably another threat about telling what he knew. Falout's hand struck a rigging stay. It must have hurt like the devil. He saw red. It was the fable of the lion and the gnat all over again. Forgetting he was a ship's master, he started chasing the kid. At first, the boy ran off laughing. The captain started to panic. A chance remark, and anyone who heard it would know everything. Falout was out of his mind with fear. I saw him reach out to catch Jean-Marie by the shoulders, but instead of grabbing hold of him, he pushed him over, head first. That's it. Fatalities occur. His head collided with a capstan. I heard the sound. It was awful. A dull thud. His skull. He held both hands up to his face. He was deathly pale. Sweat streamed down his forehead. A big wave swept over the deck at that moment. So it was a waterlogged body that the captain bent down to examine. At the same time, he caught sight of me. I don't think it crossed my mind to hide. I started walking towards him. I got there just in time to see the boy's body clench and then stiffen in a reflex that I'll never forget. Dead. It was so senseless. The two of us looked at each other, not taking it in, unable to understand what an appalling thing had happened. No one else had seen or heard anything. Falout didn't dare touch the boy. It was me who felt his chest, his hands, and that crumpled skull. There was no blood, no wound, just the skull, which had cracked. We stayed there for maybe a quarter of an hour, not knowing what to do, grim, shoulders frozen, while at intervals the spray lashed our faces. The captain was not the same man. It was as if something inside him had been broken too. When he spoke, his voice was sharp, without warmth. The crew mustn't learn the truth, bad for ship's discipline. And while I looked on, he himself picked the boy up. Then just one more effort. Though I do remember that with his thumb, he made the sign of the cross on the boy's forehead. The body, which had been snatched by the sea, was swept back twice against the hull. Both of us were still standing in the dark. We did not dare look at each other. We didn't dare speak. So, Maigret had just lit his pipe, clamping his teeth hard on the stem. A nurse came in. Both men watched her with eyes that seemed so vacant that she was disconcerted and stammered, "Time to take your temperature. Come back later." When the door closed behind her, the inspector asked, "Was it then that he told you about the woman?" From then on, he was never the same again. He probably wasn't certifiably mad, but there was definitely something unhinged about him. He put one hand on my shoulder and murmured, "And all because of a woman, young man." I was cold. I was not thinking straight. I couldn't take my eyes off the sea on the side where the body had been carried away. Did they tell you about the captain? A short, lean man with a face full of energy. He usually spoke in terse, unfinished phrases. That was it. 55 years old, coming up to retirement, solid reputation, a little put by in the bank, all over finished, in 1 minute, less than a minute, on account of a kid who, no, on account of a woman. And then and there, in the darkness, in a quiet, angry voice, he told me the whole story, bit by bit. A woman from Le Havre, a woman who couldn't have been up to much. He was well aware of that, but he couldn't live without her. He'd brought her with him, and the moment he did, he had a sudden feeling that her presence on board would mean trouble. She was there, asleep. The wireless operator began to fidget restlessly. I can't remember everything he told me, for he had this need to talk about her, which he did with a mixture of loathing and passion. A captain is never justified in causing a scandal likely to undermine his authority. I can still hear those words. It was my first time out on a boat, and I now thought of the sea as a monster which would swallow us all up. Fallout quoted examples. In such a year, such and such a captain, who had brought his mistress along with him. There were so many fights on board that 3 men never came back. The wind was strengthening. The spray kept coming at us. From time to time, a wave would lick at our feet, which kept sliding on the slippery metal deck. He wasn't mad. Oh no. But he wasn't fouled anymore either. See this trip through, and then we'll see. I didn't understand what he meant. He struck me as being both sensible and freakish. A man still clinging to his sense of duty. No one must know. A captain can never be in the wrong. My nerves were so strung out I was ill with it. I couldn't think any more. My thoughts were all jumbled up in my head, and by the finish, it felt as if I was living through a waking nightmare. That woman in the cabin, the woman a man like the captain could not live without, the woman whose very name made him catch his breath. And there was me writing reams and reams to my fiancée, who I wouldn't be seeing again for 3 months, and I never felt obsessed, possessed like that. And when he said words like her flesh or her body, I felt my cheeks go hot, without knowing why. Maigret put the question slowly, and no one, apart from the 2 of you, knew the truth about the death of Jean-Marie. No one. And was it the captain who, in the customary way, read out the prayers for the dead? At first light, the weather had got thick. We were steaming through icy gray mist. Didn't the crew say anything? There were funny looks and some whispering, but Fallout was more authoritarian than ever, and his voice had acquired a new cutting edge. He would not tolerate any answering back. He got angry with anyone who looked at him in a way he didn't like. He spied on the men, as if he was trying to detect any suspicions they might be getting. What about you? Leclinch didn't answer. He stretched out one arm for a glass of water on his bedside table and drank from it greedily. So you began prowling round the cabin more often, didn't you? You wanted to see this woman who had got so far under the captain's skin. Did you start the following night? Yes, I ran into her, just for a moment. Then the next night, I'd noticed that the key to the wireless room was the same as the key of the cabin. It was the captain's watch. I crept in, like a thief. You went to bed with her. The wireless operator's face hardened. I swear, you won't understand. You can't. The whole atmosphere was nothing like anything that happens in the real world. The kid the previous day's ceremony, but whenever I thought about it, the same picture kept surfacing in my mind. The image of a woman unlike any other. A woman whose body, whose flesh could turn a man into something that he was not. She led you on. She was in bed, half dressed. He turned bright scarlet. He looked away. How long did you stay in the cabin? Maybe a couple of hours. I don't remember. When I left with the blood still pounding in my ears, the captain was there, just outside the door. He didn't say a word. He watched me walk past. I almost went down on my knees so I could say it wasn't my fault and that I was sorry. But he remained stony-faced. I walked on. I returned to my post. I was scared. After that, I always went around with my loaded revolver in my pocket because I was convinced he was going to kill me. He never spoke to me again, except for ship's business, and even then, most of the time, he sent me his orders in writing. I wish I could explain it better, but I can't. Each day, it got worse. I had a feeling that everybody knew about the terrible thing that happened. The chief mechanic went sniffing around the cabin too. The captain stayed inside it for hours and hours. The men started giving us inquisitive, anxious looks. They guessed that something was going on. How many times did I hear talk of the evil eye? But there was only one thing I wanted. Of course there was, grunted Maigret. There was a silence. Leclinch stared at the inspector with eyes full of resentment. We ran into bad weather. 10 days on the trot. I was seasick, but I kept thinking about her. She was fragrant. I can't explain. It was like a pain. That's it. A desire capable of inflicting pain, of making me weep tears of rage. Especially when I saw the captain go into his cabin, because now I could imagine. You see, she'd called me her big boy in a special voice, sort of breathy. I kept saying those two words over and over to torture myself. I stopped writing to Marie. I built impossible dreams I'd run away with that woman the moment we got back to Fécamp. What about the captain? He got even more stony-faced and brusque. Maybe there was a touch of madness about him after all. I don't know. He gave orders that we were to fish at some location or other, and all the old hands claimed no one had ever seen a fish in those waters. He refused to have his orders questioned. He was afraid of me. Did he know I had a gun? He had one too. Whenever we met, he kept his hand near his pocket. I kept trying to see Adele again, but he was always around, with bags under his eyes and his lips drawn back, and the stink of cod. The men who were salting the fish down in the hold. There was one accident after another, and the chief mechanic was also on the prowl. It got so that none of us spoke freely anymore. We were like three lunatics. There were nights when I believe I could have killed somebody to get to her. Can you understand that? Nights when I tore my handkerchief to shreds with my teeth while I repeated over and over in the same voice that she had used. My big boy. That's my big fool. How long it seemed. Each night was followed by a new day, and then more days, and with nothing but gray water around us, freezing fogs, fish scales and cod guts everywhere. A taste of pickling brine in the back of the throat that made your stomach heave. Just that once, I believe that if I could have gone to her one more time, I'd have been cured. But it was impossible. He was there. He was always there. more hollow-eyed all the time. The constant pitching and tossing, with nothing as far as the eye could see, and then we saw cliffs. Can you grasp the fact that it had been like that for 3 months? Well, instead of being cured, I was even sicker. It's only now that I'm beginning to realize that it was a sickness. I hated the captain who was always in my way. I detested that man who was already old and kept a woman like Adele under lock and key. I was afraid of returning to port. I was afraid of losing her forever. By the finish, I was as scared of him as of the devil himself. Yes, as if he were some kind of evil genie who was keeping the woman all to himself. As we got in, there were a few navigation errors. Then the men jumped ashore, relieved to be back, and headed straight for the bars. But I knew the captain was only waiting for the cover of night to get Adele off the boat. I went back to my room over Leon's bar. There were old letters, photos of my fiancée, and the like. And I don't know why, but I got into a vile temper and I burned the whole lot. Then I went back out. I wanted her. I'll say it again, I wanted her. Hadn't she told me that when we got back, Falut would marry her? I bumped into a man. He let himself slump back onto his pillow, and on his tortured features appeared an expression of agonized torment. Because you know, he gasped. Yes, Jean-Marie's father. The trawler was berthed. Only the captain and Adele were still on board. He was about to bring her out. And then, please, no more. And then you told the man who had come to look at the boat on which his boy had died that his son had been murdered, true, and you followed him. You were hiding behind a truck when he went up to the captain. Stop. The murder happened there, while you watched. Please stop. No. You were there when it happened. Then you went on board and let the woman out. I didn't want her anymore. From outside came a long blast of a hooter. Leclinch's lips trembled as he stammered, "The Ocean?" That's right. She sails at high tide. Neither of them spoke. They could hear all the sounds made in the hospital, down to the muffled swish of a patient's trolley being wheeled to the operating theater. I didn't want her anymore, the wireless operator repeated wildly. But it was too late. There was another silence. Then Leclinch's voice came again. And yet, now, I want so much to. He did not dare pronounce the word that stuck to his tongue. Live. Then he went on. Don't you understand? I was mad. I don't understand it myself. It all happened elsewhere. In another world. Then we got back here. And I realized what had been happening. Listen, there was that dark cabin and men prowling round, and nothing else existed. I felt as if that was my whole life. I longed to hear those words again. My big boy. I couldn't even begin to say how it all happened. I opened the door. She slipped out. There was a man in tan-colored shoes waiting for her, and they started hugging each other on the side of the quay. And I woke up. It's the only word for it. And ever since, all I've wanted is not to die. Marie Léonette came with you to see me. Adele came too, with that other man. What do you want me to say? It's too late now, isn't it? I was let out of jail. I went on board and got my revolver. Marie was waiting for me by the boat. She didn't know. And that same afternoon, that woman was there talking, and the man in the tan-colored shoes. Who could possibly make sense of it all? I pulled the trigger. It took me an age to bring myself to do it, on account of Marie Léonette, who was there. And now, he sobbed. Then he literally screamed, "All the same, I've got to die, and I don't want to die. I'm afraid of dying. I. His body was racked by such spasms that Maigret called a nurse, who quietly and unfussily subdued him with an economical ease born of long professional experience. The trawler gave a second harrowing summons on its hooter, and the women hurried down to line the jetty. Chapter 11. Maigret reached the quay just as the new captain was about to give the order to cast off the hawsers. He caught sight of the chief mechanic, who was saying goodbye to his wife. He went up to him and took him to one side. "Something I need to know. It was you, wasn't it, who found the captain's will and dropped it into the police station letterbox?" The man looked worried and hesitated. "You've nothing to worry about. You suspected Leclinch. You thought that it was a way of saving his neck, even though you both had had your eye on the same woman." The hooter, peremptory now, barked at the latecomers, and hugging couples on the quayside peeled away from each other. "Don't bring all that up again. Do you mind? Is it true that he's going to die unless we can save him? Where was the will? Among the captain's papers. What exactly were you looking for?" "I was hoping to find a photo," the man said, lowering his eyes. "Look, let me go. I've got to." The hawser fell into the water. The gangway was being raised. The chief mechanic jumped onto the deck, gave his wife a last wave, and cast a final look at Maigret. Then the trawler headed slowly towards the harbor entrance. A sailor lifted the ship's boy, who was barely 15, onto his shoulders. The boy had got hold of the man's pipe and was proudly clenching it between his teeth. On the land, women were weeping. By walking quickly, they could follow the vessel, which did not pick up speed until it was clear of the jetties. Some voices were shouting out reminders. "If you come across the Atlantique, don't forget to tell Duguay that his wife." The sky was still low and threatening. The wind pressed down on the water, ruckling its surface and raising small, white-crested waves, which made an angry washing sound. A Parisian in whites was taking photos of the departing trawler. He had two little girls in white dresses in tow. They were laughing. Maigret collided with a woman, almost knocking her over. She clutched his arm and asked, "Well, is he better?" It was Adele, who hadn't powdered her nose since at least that morning, and the skin of her face was shiny. "Where's Bouzier?" asked the inspector. "He said he'd rather go back to Le Havre. He doesn't want any trouble." "Anyway, I said I was finishing with him. But what about that boy, Leclinch?" "Don't know. Go on. You can tell me." "Absolutely not." He turned and left her standing there. He'd picked out a group on the jetty, Marie Leonec, her father, and Madame Maigret. All three were facing in the direction of the trawler, which for a moment drew level with them. Marie Leonec was saying fervently, "That's his boat." Maigret slowly walked towards them, in a surly mood. His wife was the first to spot him among the crowd which had gathered to see the trawler set off for the Grand Banks. "Did he pull through?" Monsieur Leonec, looking anxious, turned his misshapen nose in his direction. "Ah, I'm so glad to see you. Where are you with your inquiries? Inspector? Nowhere? Meaning? Nothing. I don't know." Marie opened her eyes wide. "But Pierre, the operation was a success. It seems he'll be all right. He's innocent, isn't he? Oh, please, Tell my father he didn't do it." She put her whole heart into the words, contemplating her. He saw how she would be in 10 years' time, with the same look as her father, a somewhat overbearing manner ideally suited to dealing with customers in the shop. He didn't kill the captain. Turning to his wife, "I've just had a telegram calling me back to Paris. So soon I'd promised to go swimming tomorrow with—" She caught his eye and understood. "If you'll excuse us, we'll walk back to the hotel with you." Maigret saw Jean-Marie's father, dead drunk, still brandishing his fist at the trawler, and looked away. "Don't put yourselves out, please." "Tell me," said Monsieur Leonec, "do you think I could arrange for him to be transferred to Quimper? People are bound to talk." Marie looked pleadingly at him. She was very pale. She said in a faltering voice, "After all, he is innocent. I don't know. You are better placed. But at least you must allow me to offer you something. A bottle of champagne. No, thanks. Just a glass of something Benedictine, for example, since we're in the town where—" "A beer." Then, upstairs, Madame Maigret was shutting their cases. "So you share my opinion. Then, he's a fine boy who—" She still had that little girl look about her, the look that pleaded with him to say yes. "I think he'll make a good husband." "And be a good hand at business," said her father, going one better. "Because I won't have him sailing the high seas for months on end. When a man's married, he has a responsibility to—" "Goes without saying, especially since I have no son. Surely you can understand that—" "Of course." Maigret was keeping an eye on the stairs. Eventually, his wife appeared. "The luggage is all ready. They say there's not a train until—" "Doesn't matter. We'll hire a car. It was a getaway. If ever you have occasion to be in Quimper—" "Yes, yes." And the way the girl looked at him, she seemed to have understood that things were not all as straightforward as they seemed. But her eyes pleaded with Maigret not to say any more. She wanted her fiancé. The inspector shook hands all round, paid the bill, and finished his beer. "Thank you so much, Detective Chief Inspector Maigret. There really is no need." The car, which had been hired by phone, arrived. "So unless you have come up with something which I have missed, I shall sign off with a recommendation that the case be closed." This was a passage from a letter sent by Chief Inspector Grenier of the Le Havre police to Maigret, who replied by telegraph agreed. 6 months later, he was sent a card through the post, which said, "Madame Leclanche has great pleasure in announcing the wedding of her son, Pierre, and Mademoiselle Marie Leonec," which, and shortly afterwards, when in connection with another inquiry, he was looking round a certain kind of establishment in Rue Pasquier, he thought he recognized a young woman who looked quickly away, Adele, and that was all, or not quite. 5 years later, Maigret was on a short visit to Quimper. He saw the proprietor of a chandler's shop standing in his doorway. He was still a young man, very tall, with the beginnings of a paunch. He walked with a slight limp, and he called to a toddler of 3 who was playing with his top on the pavement, "Come in now, Pierrot, your mother will be cross." The man, too preoccupied with his offspring, did not recognize Maigret, who in any case quickened his step, looked away, and pulled a wry face. Cell 11, high surveillance. When a bell somewhere rang twice, the prisoner was sitting on his bunk with his 2 large hands clasped about his folded knees. For the space of perhaps a minute, He did not move, as if suspended in time. Then, with a sudden release of breath, he stretched his arms and legs and stood up in his cell. A huge man, ungainly, his head too big, his arms too long, and his chest hollow. His face was unreadable, expressing only numbness or perhaps a kind of inhuman indifference. Yet before he moved across to the door with the spy hole, now closed, he brandished a fist towards one of the walls. On the other side of that wall was an identical cell, one of the cells on the Santé prison's high surveillance wing. In it, as in 4 other cells, was a convicted criminal waiting for either a stay of execution or the arrival of the solemn party of men who would come one night and wake him without saying a word. Every day for 5 days, every hour, every minute, the other prisoner had groaned, at times in a low, monotonous whimper, at others accompanied by screams, tears, howls of defiance. Number 11 had never set eyes on him, knew nothing of him. At most, judging by his voice, he could make a guess that his neighbor was young. At this moment, the groaning was weary, mechanical, while in the eyes of the man who had just got to his feet there was a flash of hatred, and he clenched his large-knuckled fists. From the corridor and passageways, from the exercise yards, from every part of the fortress that is the Santé prison, from the streets surrounding it, from Paris, no sound reached him, except for the moaning of the man in cell 10. Number 11 pulled jerkily on his fingers, then froze twice before reaching out to put one hand on the door. The cell light was on, as laid down in regulations for high surveillance watch. Normally, a guard was required to be on duty in the corridor to open the doors of all 5 prisoners every hour. Number 11's hands played around the lock with a gesture made solemn by a tremor of fear. The door swung open. The guard's chair was there. No one was sitting on it. The man began walking, very fast, bent double, his senses reeling. His face was dead white, and only the red-tinged lids of his greenish eyes had any color. 3 times he stopped and went back the way he had come because he had taken a wrong turning and had come up against locked doors. At the end of one corridor, he heard voices. Guards were smoking and chatting in a duty room. Finally, he found himself in a yard, where the darkness was punctured at intervals by the round discs of lamps. 100 meters ahead, in front of the outer gate, a sentry was walking to and fro. To one side was a lighted window through which a man could be seen. Pipe in mouth, bent over a desk, littered with papers. Number 11 wished he could have taken another look at the note he had found 3 days earlier, stuck to the bottom of his dinner pail. But he had chewed and swallowed it, following the instructions of whoever had sent it. For while, only an hour before, he had known what it said by heart, there were now parts of it which he could not remember exactly. At 2 a.m., 15 October, your cell door will be left open and the guard will be busy elsewhere. If you follow the directions as marked below, the man passed a burning hand over his forehead, stared in terror at the discs of light, and almost cried out loud when he heard footsteps. But they came from the other side of the wall, from the street. Free people were talking out there, and their heels clacked on the pavement. When I think they charge 50 francs a seat, it was a woman's voice. Yes, "But they have expenses," came a man's voice. The prisoner felt his way along the wall, stopped, because his foot had encountered a stone, listened, so way-faced, cutting such an odd figure with those interminable arms which dangled loosely, that if this had been happening anywhere else, people would just have assumed he was a drunk. The small knot of men was waiting less than 50 meters from the invisible prisoner, in a recess of the wall, near a door on which was written Bursar's office. Detective Chief Inspector Maigret had chosen not to lean against the blackened brick wall, with his hands thrust into the pockets of his overcoat. He was standing so squarely on his strong legs, so absolutely still, that he gave the impression of lifeless bulk. But at regular intervals there came the dragging sizzle of his pipe. His eyes were watchful, but he couldn't quite eradicate the apprehension in them. A dozen times at least, he must have nudged the shoulder of Comeliot, the examining magistrate, who would not stay where he had been put. Comeliot had come directly from a social engagement in evening dress, his thin mustache neatly trimmed and with more color in his cheeks than usual. Close to them, with a scowl on his face and the collar of his coat turned up, stood Monsieur Gassier, governor of the Santé, who was trying to distance himself from what was happening. There was a slight chill in the air. The sentry by the gate stamped his feet, and his breath rose in the air like thin columns of steam. The prisoner, who avoided areas that were lit, could not be seen. But however careful he was to make no noise, he could still be heard moving around, and the onlookers were able, after a fashion, to follow his every movement. After 10 minutes, the examining magistrate shuffled nearer to Maigret and opened his mouth to say something, but the inspector gripped his shoulder with such strength that the magistrate desisted, sighed, and from a pocket mechanically took a cigarette, which was snatched from his hands. All three had understood. Number 11 did not know the way, and at any moment might stumble into a patrol. And they could do nothing about it. They could hardly lead him by the hand to the place at the foot of the wall, where the parcel of clothes had been left for him, and where a knotted rope dangled. At intervals, a vehicle drove past in the street outside. Sometimes there were also people talking, and their voices echoed in a particular way in the prison yard. All the three men could do was to exchange glances. The look in the governor's eyes was bad-tempered, sarcastic, fierce. Comeliot, the examining magistrate, was aware of his own growing anxiety, and the apprehension too. Maigret alone did not flinch, his strength of will ensuring that he remained confident. But if he had been standing in a strong light, his brow would have been observed to glisten with sweat. When the half-hour struck, the man was still dithering, all at sea. But 1 second later, the three watching men were all startled and felt the same shock. They had not heard the release of breath. They had rather sensed it. They could feel the feverish haste of their man, who had just stumbled over the parcel of clothes and seen the rope. The footsteps of the sentry continued to mark the rhythm of passing time. The magistrate took his opportunity and hissed, "You're sure he—" Maigret turned such a look on him that he fell silent. The rope twitched. They made out a lighter stain against the dark wall, the face of number 11, who was using his powerful wrists to haul himself up. It took an age. It took 10, 20 times longer than they had anticipated. And when he reached the top, it looked as if he had given up, because he had completely stopped moving. They could make him out now, or at least his silhouette, lying flat on the top of the wall. Was he paralyzed by vertigo? Was he hesitating about dropping down into the road? Were there passers-by, or a courting couple crouching in some recess who were stopping him? Camilio snapped his fingers impatiently. The governor muttered, "I don't suppose you need me anymore." The rope was hauled up so that it could be dropped down the other side. The man disappeared. "If I didn't have such confidence in you, Detective Chief Inspector, I swear I'd never have let myself be mixed up in anything like this. All the same, I still think Hurton is guilty. And what if he manages to get away from you? What then?" "Will I see you tomorrow?" was all that Maigret asked. "I'll be in my office any time after 10. They shook hands without saying anything more. The governor held out a hand grudgingly and, as he left, muttered a few indistinct words. Maigret remained close to the wall for a few moments longer and did not move off towards the gate until he had heard someone running off as fast as he could. He gave a wave to the guard on duty, looked up and down the empty street, and walked along it, and then into Rue Jean Dolent. "Did he get away?" he asked a dark figure which hugged the wall, headed towards Boulevard Arago. "Dufour and Janvier are on his tail." "You can go home now," Maigret, his mind elsewhere, shook the officer's hand, moved off with his stolid tread, head down, lighting his pipe as he went. It was 4 in the morning when he pushed open the door of his office on Quai des Orfèvres. With a sigh, he took off his overcoat, swallowed half the contents of a glass of warm beer, which had been left among his papers, and sat heavily into his chair. In front of him was a fat manila file on which a police clerk had written, in a flowery hand, "Hurton case." He waited for 3 hours. The bare electric bulb was surrounded by a cloud of smoke, which stirred at the slightest movement of air. From time to time, Maigret got up to poke the stove, then returned to his seat, but not before removing first his jacket, then his collar, and finally his waistcoat. The phone was within easy reach, and at around 7 o'clock, he lifted the receiver just to make sure that they had not forgotten to give him an outside line. The buff-colored file was open. Reports, newspaper cuttings, witness statements, and photographs had spilled out onto the desk, and Maigret stared at them distantly, sometimes reaching for a document, not so much to read it as to confirm a train of thought. The whole collection was topped by a newspaper cutting with a forceful headline spread over 2 newspaper columns: "Joseph Hurton, killer of Madame Henderson and her maid, sentenced to death this morning." Maigret was smoking continuously, keeping an anxious eye on the telephone, which remained obstinately silent. At 6:10, it rang, but it was a wrong number. From where he sat, the inspector could read parts of various documents, though he now knew them by heart. Joseph Jean-Marie Hurton, 27, born Melun, a delivery man for Monsieur Girardier, a florist in Rue de Sèvres. The man's photograph was visible. It had been taken a year before in a fairground booth at Neuilly. A big man with unusually long arms, triangular-shaped head, washed-out complexion, and clothes which denoted a vulgar dress sense. Brutal killing at St. Cloud. Rich American stabbed to death along with her maid. It had happened in July. Maigret pushed away the gruesome shots from criminal records, both corpses, seen from different angles, blood everywhere, faces convulsed, Night clothes disordered, stained, torn. Detective Chief Inspector Maigret of the Police Judiciaire has cleared up the St. Cloud tragedy. The murderer is behind bars. He ruffled through the papers spread out in front of him and found the cutting, which was dated 10 days earlier. Joseph Hurton, killer of Madame Henderson and her maid, sentenced to death this morning. In the courtyard of the prefecture, a police van was disembarking the previous night's haul, who were mostly women. The first footsteps of the day could be heard in the corridors, and the mist above the Seine was dispersing. That you, Dufour? Yes, sir. Well, nothing. That is, if you want, I'll go down there myself. But for the moment, Janvier can manage on his own. Where is he? At the Untangle. Say again. The what? A bistro, not far from Issy-les-Moulineaux. I'll get a taxi and join you, so I can put you in the picture. Maigret paced up and down, sent out an office junior to order coffee and croissants for him at the Brasserie Dauphine. He had just begun to eat when Inspector Dufour, a small man neatly turned out in his gray suit and very high, very stiff, detachable collar, came in with his usual air of mystery. First thing, what's this Untangle? Growled Maigret. Sit down. A bistro used by boatmen on the bank of the Seine between Grenelle and Issy-les-Moulineaux. Did he make straight for it? Not at all. And it was a miracle he didn't manage to give Janvier and me the slip. Have you had breakfast? Yes, at the Untangle. Very well. Tell me what happened. You saw him get away, didn't you? At first he ran, as if he was scared of being recaptured. He didn't stop being jittery until he got to the Lion de Belfort. He halted and stared at it. He seemed bewildered. Did he know he was being tailed? Definitely not. He never turned round once. And then, I think a blind man, or somebody who'd never been to Paris before, would have behaved just as he did. He suddenly turned into the avenue that runs through Montparnasse Cemetery. I forget what it's called. There wasn't a soul about. It was pretty gloomy just there. He couldn't have known where he was, because when he walked through the iron gates and saw the tombstones, he started running again. Go on. Maigret, his mouth full, seemed more relaxed. We got to Montparnasse. The big cafes were closed, but a few clubs were still open. I remember that he stopped at one of them. There was the sound of jazz coming from inside. Then this little street seller went up to him with her basket of flowers, and he ran off again. Which way did he go? No particular way. Really. He went down Boulevard Raspail. Then he doubled back down a side street and came out again outside the entrance to Montparnasse station. How did he seem? He didn't seem like anything. The same as when he was being investigated. As when he was in court. Very pale, and a scared, unfocused look in his eyes. Half an hour later, we were at Les Halles, and no one had tried to speak to him. No one. And did he post anything in a letterbox? I'm positive he didn't. Janvier was following him on one side of the road, and I was on the other. We didn't miss a thing he did. Wait, he did stop for a moment, at a stand selling hot sausages and fries. He hesitated, and then he was off again. Perhaps because he'd caught sight of a uniformed officer. Did you get the impression he was looking for a particular address? I didn't. You'd have thought he was a drunk who goes in whatever direction God points him. Then we were back at the Seine, at Place de la Concorde. He decided he was going to walk along the riverbank. He stopped and sat down 2 or 3 times, Sat on what? Once on the stone parapet and another time on a bench. I couldn't swear to it, but I think the second time he was crying. Anyway, he was holding his head in both hands. No one else on the bench. Nobody. Then we walked some more. Imagine how far. All the way to Moulineaux. Now and then he'd stop and look down at the water. The tugs were beginning to move around. Then the factory workers started filling the streets. He still kept going, like a man who has no idea what he's going to do next. Anything else? That's about it. Oh, one thing. When he got to Pont Mirabeau, he put both hands in his pockets and took something out of them. 5-franc notes. That's what Janvier and I both thought we saw. At that point, he started looking around him for something. Obviously a bistro. But nothing was open on the right bank. He crossed over. He went into a small bar full of stokers and ordered a coffee and a tot of rum. The Citanguette? Not yet. Janvier and I had legs like jelly, and unlike him, we couldn't buy a drink to warm us up. Off he went again. He led us this way and that. Janvier, who took a note of all the streets, will give you a full report. In the end, we got back to the river, came out near a large factory, down that way. It's pretty deserted. There are a few bushes and grass like in the country among all the heaps of spoil. Barges are moored up near a crane, maybe 20 of them. The Citanguette is an inn you wouldn't expect to find there, a small bistro where they serve food. On the right is an extension with a mechanical piano and a sign saying Dancing Saturdays and Sundays. Our man drank another coffee and more rum. They brought him a plate of sausages after making him wait a long time for it. He spoke to the landlord, and a quarter of an hour later, we saw them both disappear upstairs. When the landlord came back, I went in. I asked him point blank if he had let any rooms. He said, why has he been up to something? Clearly, a man used to having dealings with the police. There was no point trying to bluff it out. I preferred to scare him. I told him that if he breathed one word to his customer, his place would be shut down. He doesn't know him. I'm sure of that. The clientele is mostly men from the barges. And as soon as it's midday, the workers from the factory nearby all troop in for an aperitif. Apparently, when Hurton got inside his room, he threw himself on the bed without taking his shoes off. The landlord told him off, so he dropped them on the floor and immediately fell asleep. Has Janvier stayed on? He's still there? You can call him because the Citanguette has a telephone on account of the bargemen. They often need to get in touch with their owners. Maigret picked up the phone. A few moments later, Janvier was on the other end of the line. Hello, what's our man doing now? Sleeping. Anything suspicious to report? Nothing. All quiet as quiet. You can hear him snoring from the foot of the stairs. Maigret hung up and ran his eyes over the small figure of Dufour from head to foot. You won't let him give you the slip? He asked. The officer was about to protest, but Maigret put one hand on his shoulder and went on in a sober voice. Listen, son, I know you'll do everything you can, but my job is on the line here, and a lot else besides. Fact is, I can't go myself. The wretch knows me. Sir, I swear. Don't swear. Just go. And with a curt movement of his hand, Maigret swept the various documents into the manila folder, which he placed in a drawer. And if you need more men, don't hesitate to ask. Joseph Hurton's picture was still on the desk, and Maigret gazed briefly at his bony head, flapping ears, and wide, bloodless lips. 3 medics had examined the man. 2 had said low intelligence, fully responsible for his actions. The third, quoted by the defense, had coyly ventured troubled atavism, diminished responsibility, and Maigret, who had arrested Joseph Hurton, had told the chief of police. The public prosecutor and the examining magistrate, he's either insane or innocent, and he had undertaken to prove it. From the corridor came the receding sound of Inspector Dufour's footsteps as he went trippingly on his way.